She handed him the separation papers on the coldest night of the year. Duke Adrian Blackthorne, the man who'd never lost a negotiation, never bent to anyone, stood frozen, staring at the documents in his wife's trembling hands. 6 months of silence, 6 months of sleeping in separate wings, 6 months of pretending this marriage was anything but a graveyard. Lydia Whitmore had finally chosen herself. And in that moment, watching her walk toward the door with her chin raised and tears she refused to let fall, Adrian realized he'd made the worst mistake of his life. But let's go back. Let's go back to where it all started, to the wedding that felt more like a funeral. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The estate looked like something out of a Gothic painting, all sharp angles and gray stone, perched on a hillside that seemed determined to pitch anyone foolish enough to climb it straight into the North Sea. The wind didn't just blow here. It attacked. It clawed at window panes and tore at roof tiles and made the ancient oak trees bend like penitents. Lydia stood in the entrance hall of Blackthorne Manor, still wearing her wedding dress, and thought, this is where joy comes to die. The ceremony had been 3 hours ago, small, efficient, the kind of wedding where the vows felt less like promises and more like terms of a business contract being read aloud in front of witnesses. Her father had cried, not from happiness, but from relief. The Whitmore estate had been drowning in debt for years, and Duke Adrian Blackthorne's offer had been the only life raft in sight. Marry his daughter to the Duke. Erase the debt. Save the family name. Simple math. Lydia had known what she was agreeing to. She wasn't naive. But knowing something in theory and living it in practice were two entirely different hells. Your rooms are in the East Wing. She turned. Adrian stood 10 feet away, still in his formal coat, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. He was handsome in that sharp, dangerous way. Dark hair, darker eyes, a jaw that could cut glass. 28 years old and already carrying himself like a man who'd seen too much and felt too little. Our rooms? Lydia asked quietly. Your rooms, he corrected. I'm in the West Wing. The entrance hall was the size of her childhood home's entire ground floor. Between the East and West Wings lay what felt like a country mile of cold marble and colder silence. I see. The housekeeper, Mrs. Thorne, will show you around tomorrow. If you need anything, ask her. And if I need to speak with you? His expression didn't change. Send a note. A note. Yes. Lydia felt something crack inside her chest. Something small and quiet, like ice breaking on a pond. We're married, Adrian. I'm aware. He finally looked at her, really looked at her, and his eyes were empty. I made my expectations clear before the wedding. I need an heir. That requires cooperation. But beyond that, I see no reason we need to complicate this arrangement with pretense. Pretense, she repeated. The word tasted like ash. Love. Companionship. Whatever romantic notions you're harboring. He adjusted his cufflinks, a gesture so casual it felt deliberately cruel. I don't have those to offer. This is a practical union. If you can accept that, we'll get along fine. She should have said something cutting, something that would make him flinch the way his words made her flinch. But Lydia had been raised to be polite, accommodating, pleasant. Even when her world was falling apart, the training held. I understand, she said. Good. He nodded once, a dismissal, and turned toward the corridor leading to the West Wing. Welcome to Blackthorne Manor, Lydia. Then he left. She stood there in her wedding dress, in the entrance hall of her new prison, and listened to his footsteps echo away into nothing. The East Wing was beautiful in the way a mausoleum is beautiful. High ceilings, ornate molding, furniture that probably cost more than her father's yearly income, all arranged with mathematical precision. Her bedroom was 3 times the size of the one she'd grown up in, with a 4-poster bed that looked like it had never been slept in and windows that overlooked the gardens, or what had once been gardens. Now they were just tangles of dead vines and overgrown weeds slowly being reclaimed by the wild. Mrs. Thorne was 60 if she was a day, with steel-gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful and an expression that suggested she'd seen every variety of human foolishness and been unimpressed by all of it. His Grace takes breakfast at 7, she said, unpacking Lydia's trunk with brisk efficiency. He's usually in his study until noon. Lunch is served at 1, though he rarely attends. Dinner is at 8. Does he attend dinner? When business requires it, Mrs. Thorne didn't look up from the clothing she was folding. Otherwise, no. I see. The late Duchess, his mother, used to take meals in the conservatory. You're welcome to do the same if you prefer. The late Duchess, Lydia repeated carefully. When did she pass? 12 years ago. His Grace was 16. And his father? Mrs. Thorne's hand stilled for just a moment. The late Duke passed when Adrian was 10. Riding accident. 6 years between losing his father and losing his mother. Lydia tried to imagine what that must have done to a child, to a young man still figuring out who he was supposed to be, and found she couldn't quite grasp it. That must have been difficult, she said quietly. The Blackthorns don't do difficulty, Your Grace. They do duty. Mrs. Thorne closed the now empty trunk with a decisive snap. Will you be needing anything else this evening? Yes, Lydia thought. I need my husband to look at me like I'm a person instead of a broodmare. I need this house to feel less like a tomb. I need to understand what I've gotten myself into. No, she said. Thank you, Mrs. Thorne. The housekeeper nodded and left, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded unnervingly like a lock engaging. Lydia walked to the window and stared out at the ruined gardens. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it just looked cold. She pressed her palm against the glass and felt the chill seep through. What have I done? The first week passed in a fog of routines that weren't really routines, more like a series of careful avoiding patterns. Lydia ate breakfast alone in her rooms. She walked the corridors alone, mapping out the manor's labyrinthine layout. She took tea alone in the conservatory Mrs. Thorne had mentioned, a glass-domed room that smelled like damp earth and forgotten plants. She saw Adrian exactly 3 times. Once, in passing, as he left his study and she was coming down the main staircase. He'd nodded. She'd nodded back. Neither had spoken. Once, at dinner, when he'd been hosting some local magistrate and his wife, and apparently decided having a duchess present would be useful for appearances. Lydia had smiled and made pleasant conversation and played her part perfectly. Adrian had thanked her afterward, a formal, distant thank you that made her feel like hired help. And once, late at night, when she'd been unable to sleep and had wandered down to the library, she'd pushed open his door and found him there, sitting in a leather chair by the fire, reading something that looked ancient and academic. He'd glanced up, met her eyes, and for just a second she'd seen something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe, or something softer. Then it was gone. I didn't mean to disturb you, she'd said. You didn't. But he'd closed his book and left anyway, leaving her alone with the fire and the shadows and the crushing weight of silence. By the end of the second week, Lydia had started talking to herself just to remember what her own voice sounded like. You're going mad, she said aloud, standing in the conservatory and staring at a half-dead fern. Talking to plants. This is how it starts. The fern, unsurprisingly, didn't respond. She'd been examining the conservatory more closely over the past few days. It was a mess. Years of neglect layered on top of what had probably once been something spectacular. Broken pots, cracked tiles, tables covered in dirt and dead leaves. But underneath all that decay, she could see the bones of something beautiful. Lydia had always been good with plants. Back home, she'd kept a small garden. Nothing fancy, just roses and herbs and whatever else caught her interest. It had been her escape, her quiet place where the world made sense. She needed that now more than ever. Mrs. Thorne? She called, heading back into the manor. The housekeeper appeared within minutes, as if she'd been waiting nearby. Yes, Your Grace? The conservatory. Is anyone using it? Not for years, ma'am. Would His Grace object if I worked on it? Cleaned it up? Replanted things? Mrs. Thorne's expression shifted, something that might have been approval, though it was hard to tell. His Grace doesn't concern himself with the conservatory, or the gardens, for that matter. If you want to take them on, I doubt he'd notice, let alone object. The words stung more than they should have. He wouldn't notice. Of course he wouldn't. He barely noticed her. "Then I'll start tomorrow," Lydia said. "Do we have gardening tools? Seeds?" "In the potting shed, behind the east garden wall. Everything's still there from when the late Duchess used them." Adrian's mother. The woman who'd died 12 years ago and left her son to turn into this frozen, unreachable thing. "Thank you, Mrs. Thorne." The housekeeper nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Your Grace, if I may?" "Of course." "The late Duchess used to say the gardens were the only place where she could breathe," Mrs. Thorne's face softened just slightly. "Perhaps you'll find the same." The potting shed was a disaster. Rusted tools, broken clay pots stacked in precarious towers. Seed packets so old the writing had faded to ghosts. But Lydia rolled up her sleeves and got to work anyway, because what else was she going to do? Sit in her beautiful prison and slowly lose her mind? She hauled out the usable tools, scrubbed them clean, organized them by type. She sorted through the seed packets, separating the salvageable from the hopeless. She found a pair of leather gloves that were too big but would work, and a wide-brimmed hat that had probably belonged to Adrian's mother, wearing a dead woman's hat to garden in a dead woman's conservatory. Lydia laughed, a sharp, slightly unhinged sound, and got back to work. Over the next few days, she cleared out the worst of the debris from the conservatory, swept the floors, washed the windows until light actually made it through the grime. It was hard, physical work, and she loved it. Loved the way her muscles ached. Loved having something to focus on besides the emptiness of her marriage. She started with the hardiest plants, rosemary, lavender, a few struggling rose bushes she managed to transplant from the overgrown gardens outside. Small victories, something green and alive in all this gray decay. And Adrian never said a word. He had to have noticed. The conservatory was visible from several of the manor's main windows, but he never commented. Never asked what she was doing, never showed even the slightest flicker of interest. It shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. 3 weeks into the marriage, Lydia was repotting a small rosebush when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting Mrs. Thorne, and found Adrian instead. He stood in the conservatory doorway, looking profoundly out of place in his formal attire amid all the dirt and greenery. His expression was unreadable. "You've been busy," he said. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to her in over a week. "Yes," Lydia said carefully. She set down her trowel and pulled off her gloves. "I hope that's all right." "It's fine." Silence stretched between them like a physical thing. "Was there something you needed?" she asked finally. Adrian's jaw tightened. "We need to discuss the matter of an heir." And there it was, the real reason he'd sought her out. Not because he cared about what she was doing or wanted to know how she was settling in or had any interest in her as a person. Just the heir, the transaction, the whole goddamn point of this arrangement. Lydia felt that crack in her chest widen a little more. "I see," she said. "It's been 3 weeks." "I'm aware." "I don't want to pressure you, but you are," she cut in, surprised by the sharpness in her own voice. "You're standing here in the one place I've managed to carve out for myself, telling me we need to discuss the whole reason you married me. Which is pressure, Adrian, whether you want it to be or not." His eyes flashed. Anger, maybe, or something else. "This was part of our agreement." "I know what our agreement was. I haven't forgotten." She turned back to the rosebush because looking at him hurt too much. "But I'm not a broodmare. I'm a person, and I need—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I need time." "Time for what?" "To adjust, to breathe, to figure out how to live in this house with a husband who can barely stand to look at me. That's not—" He stopped. Started again. "I don't find you objectionable, Lydia." "High praise," she said bitterly. "What do you want from me?" The question hung in the air between them. What did she want? Everything he clearly couldn't give. Warmth, connection, the possibility that this marriage might be something other than a slow march toward mutual resentment. "Nothing," she said finally. "I want nothing, Adrian. You've made it very clear what this is, and I'm trying to accept that. But I need you to give me space to do it on my own terms." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "How much time?" I don't know. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. She finally turned to look at him, and something in her expression must have registered because his face shifted, just slightly, like he was seeing her for the first time. I'm trying, Adrian. I'm trying to make peace with the fact that I married a stranger who wants an heir but nothing else. But I can't just perform on command. I need time to wrap my head around what my life is now. Adrian stared at her. His hands flexed at his sides like he wanted to reach for something but didn't know what. Fine, he said finally. Take your time. But Lydia? Yes? Don't take too long. Then he left, his footsteps echoing away through the manor, and Lydia sank down onto the conservatory floor and let herself cry for the first time since the wedding. The next morning, there was a package outside her bedroom door. No note, no explanation, just a wooden crate filled with new gardening tools. High quality, expensive, clearly chosen by someone who actually knew what they were looking at. Lydia carried it to the conservatory and unpacked each piece slowly, running her fingers over smooth handles and sharp, clean blades. He'd noticed, after all. She didn't know what to do with that information, didn't know if it meant anything or if it was just another transaction. Give the wife some tools so she stays occupied and doesn't make demands. But she used them anyway, worked the soil, planted seeds, watched for the first green shoots that would mean something was growing in this cold, dead place, and tried not to think about the fact that she was probably just as trapped as the plants in their pots. Pretty things kept alive for decoration, useful for a purpose, but never really free. By the end of the first month, Lydia had established a routine. Wake early, work in the conservatory, take lunch in her rooms, read in the library, avoid Adrian as much as possible while still maintaining the appearance of a functioning household when necessary. It wasn't a life, it was survival. She saw him at dinners when he needed her there for social purposes. Local nobility, business associates, the occasional distant relative. She played her part perfectly every time. Smiled, made conversation, pretended this was a normal marriage instead of a carefully maintained fiction. And afterward, they would retreat to their separate wings and pretend the other didn't exist. Except sometimes she'd catch him watching her. Quick glances across the dinner table when he thought she wasn't looking. A moment of eye contact in the corridor that lasted just a beat too long. Once she'd been working in the conservatory and had that prickling sense of being observed. She'd looked up and seen his silhouette in a second-floor window, motionless, just watching. He'd moved away the moment their eyes met. Lydia didn't know what to make of it. Was it guilt? Curiosity? Some kind of cold calculation about whether she was performing her duties adequately? She didn't ask. Asking would mean talking, and talking would mean acknowledging the vast, aching distance between them, and that felt like more than she could handle. So she kept her head down and focused on the things she could control. The gardens were coming back to life, slowly. The conservatory was clean and organized. She'd even managed to coax a few rose bushes into blooming, small, imperfect flowers, but alive, growing, fighting against the cold, just like her. Outside. 6 weeks in, the dinner guests included Lord and Lady Pemberton and their daughter, Catherine. Lydia disliked Catherine within 5 minutes of meeting her. It wasn't anything specific. Catherine was perfectly polite, impeccably dressed, well-spoken, but there was something in the way she looked at Adrian, familiar, possessive, like she had some claim Lydia didn't understand. Adrian and I grew up together, Catherine explained over the soup course, her smile bright and sharp. Our families' estates border each other. We were practically inseparable as children. How lovely, Lydia said neutrally. Of course, everyone always assumed we'd end up married. Catherine laughed, a delicate, practiced sound. But Adrian had other plans, I suppose. Across the table, Adrian's expression didn't change. Things change, Catherine. They certainly do. Catherine's eyes flicked to Lydia, assessing. I must say, Your Grace, you're much younger than I expected. When Adrian said he was getting married, I imagined someone more established. Translation. You're too young, too common, too obviously a business arrangement. Lady Pemberton coughed delicately. Catherine, dear. I only mean that it must be quite an adjustment, Catherine continued, undeterred. Going from a small estate to something like Blackthorn Manor. All these responsibilities. I do hope you're managing. Lydia felt something hot and sharp coil in her chest. She'd been managing insults wrapped in politeness her whole life. Her family's financial troubles had made her an expert in navigating social cruelty. But this felt different, more personal. "I'm managing quite well, actually," she said, keeping her voice level. "Though I appreciate your concern." "Of course. I just know how particular Adrian can be about how things are run." Catherine turned to Adrian, her smile softening into something almost intimate. "Remember when your mother tried to rearrange the library? You were furious for weeks." "I was 14, Adrian said flatly, "and I got over it." "Did you?" Catherine's tone suggested she knew something Lydia didn't. "You always were stubborn about your spaces. I imagine having someone new in the manor must be quite the disruption." Disruption. Like Lydia was an inconvenience, an intruder. She looked at Adrian, waiting for him to say something, to defend her, to shut Catherine down, to do literally anything that suggested he saw his wife as more than a disruption. He took a sip of wine and changed the subject to crop yields. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation and simmering rage. Lydia smiled, nodded, said all the right things, and inside she felt something harden. When the guests finally left, Adrian walked them to the door while Lydia retreated to the drawing room. She stood by the window watching the Pembertons' carriage disappear down the drive and tried to breathe through the tightness in her chest. "I apologize for Catherine." She turned. Adrian stood in the doorway, still in his formal attire, looking tired. "Why?" Lydia asked. "You didn't say anything." "She was out of line." "Yes, she was." Lydia crossed her arms. "And you let her be. You sat there and let her treat me like I was some kind of placeholder, a disruption." "I didn't." "You did, Adrian. You absolutely did." She could hear her voice shaking and hated it. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to sit at a table with your husband and have another woman talk about how close you two were, how everyone expected you to marry, how particular you are about your spaces, while you just sit there and say nothing? What was I supposed to say? How about, my wife isn't a disruption, she's my wife? How about anything that suggests you actually want me here?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "You know what this marriage is, Lydia." "Yes, I know exactly what it is. A transaction, a convenience, a way for you to get an heir and for my father to clear his debts." She laughed, and it came out bitter. "But for 5 minutes, Adrian, for 5 goddamn minutes, I thought you might at least pretend to give a damn about me in front of other people. Apparently that was too much to ask." "You're being unreasonable." "I'm being unreasonable? I'm being—" She stopped, pressing her hands to her face. "I can't do this. I can't keep pretending this is normal. I can't keep acting like it doesn't hurt that my husband can barely stand to be in the same room with me." "Lydia, no." She dropped her hands and looked at him, really looked at him, past the handsome face and the cold demeanor, trying to find something human underneath. "Tell me something, anything. Tell me why you're like this. Tell me what happened that made you so afraid of feeling anything. Give me something to work with here, because I am drowning, Adrian. I'm absolutely drowning, and you're just standing on the shore watching." For a moment, just a moment, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or recognition, something real and raw and human. Then it was gone, shuttered behind that wall he wore like armor. "I'm not the man you want me to be," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for that, but I can't be something I'm not. I'm not asking you to be anything. I'm just asking you to try." "I don't know how." The admission hung between them, fragile, unexpected. Lydia stared at him. "Then learn." "It's not that simple. Nothing worth having ever is." Adrian closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he looked more exhausted than she'd ever seen him. "I should go. It's late." "Of course." She turned back to the window, dismissing him the way he'd dismissed her so many times. "Good night, Adrian." She didn't hear him leave, didn't know how long he stood there before finally walking away. But when she turned around, she was alone again. Always alone. The next morning, Catherine Pemberton's words were still echoing in Lydia's head. Disruption. Particular. Everyone expected we'd marry. She found Mrs. Thorne in the kitchens and asked the question she probably should have asked weeks ago. Was there, before me, was His Grace involved with Lady Catherine? Mrs. Thorne's hands paused in their work. Not in the way you're thinking. Then in what way? The housekeeper sighed. Their families expected it, yes. Lady Catherine certainly wanted it, but His Grace never encouraged her. He was always clear that he had no intention of marrying for anything other than practical reasons. How romantic, Lydia muttered. After his mother passed, something in him changed. Mrs. Thorne began chopping vegetables again, her movements precise and practiced. He'd always been serious, the late Duke saw to that, but after her death it was like he just shut down, stopped letting people in. Lady Catherine tried, but he wouldn't give her anything to work with. And now he's married to me instead. Yes, because I needed saving and he needed an heir. Yes. Lydia leaned against the counter. What was she like? His mother? Mrs. Thorne's expression softened. Warm, kind, everything the late Duke wasn't. She loved those gardens, spent every free moment out there, growing things, nurturing them. I think it was her way of fighting back against all the coldness in this house. Like daughter-in-law, like mother-in-law, apparently. How did she die? Pneumonia. Caught it in winter, never recovered. His Grace was 16. Still a boy, really, but he had to become the Duke overnight. Had to manage the estate, handle the responsibilities, live up to his father's legacy. There was no time to grieve, no room for weakness. So he just stopped feeling. I think he buried it so deep he forgot where he put it. Mrs. Thorne looked at her directly. But it's still there, Your Grace. I've seen glimpses of it over the years, small things, the way he is with the tenants' children, how he reacts when he thinks no one's watching. He's not heartless. He's just terrified. Of what? Of turning into his father, I think, or of losing someone else. I don't know. He doesn't talk about it. Lydia absorbed this information slowly. It didn't excuse Adrian's behavior, didn't make her feel less alone, but it gave her something, context maybe, a glimpse of the person underneath the ice. Thank you, Mrs. Thorne. For what it's worth, Your Grace, I think you're good for him, whether he knows it yet or not. That afternoon, Lydia was in the conservatory when she heard raised voices from somewhere in the manor. She followed the sound to Adrian's study and found the door slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see him standing behind his desk, facing down a tall, thin man in expensive but slightly threadbare clothing. The answer is no, Richard. You can't be serious. It's a loan, Adrian, not a gift. I'll pay it back. Like you paid back the last 3? Adrian's voice was cold. I'm not your personal bank. I'm family. You're a distant cousin who squandered every penny you've ever had on gambling and bad investments. I've bailed you out too many times already. Just this once. No. Final. Absolute. Richard's face flushed red. You heartless bastard. You sit here in your mansion, swimming in money you didn't even earn, and you won't help your own blood? I earned every penny keeping this estate running while you were busy losing yours at cards. Now get out. Your father would be ashamed. Adrian's expression didn't change, but Lydia saw his hands clench into fists. My father was ashamed of a lot of things. One more won't make a difference. Leave. Richard stormed out, nearly colliding with Lydia in the corridor. He glared at her, pure contempt, and kept walking. Inside the study, Adrian stood motionless, staring at nothing. Lydia knocked softly on the doorframe. He looked up, saw her, and some of the tension leaked out of his shoulders. How much did you hear? Enough. Then you know what a warm, loving family I have. There was something in his voice, not quite humor, not quite bitterness, something hollow. I'm sorry, Lydia said. Don't be. Richard's a parasite, always has been. Still, family is complicated. Family is a liability. He sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 28 years. My father taught me that. The only people you can trust are the ones you have leverage over. That's a lonely way to live. It's a safe way to live. Lydia stepped into the study, the first time she'd ever entered this space, and closed the door behind her. Is it, though? Because from where I'm standing, you don't look very safe. You look exhausted. I'm fine. You're not. And you don't have to be, not with me. Adrian laughed, sharp and humorless. What do you want me to say, Lydia? That I'm tired? That I've been running this estate since I was 16 and I don't know how to stop? That I lie awake at night wondering if I'm becoming my father and terrified that I already have? The words spilled out of him like a dam breaking, and Lydia realized this might be the most honest he'd ever been with her. Yes, she said quietly. Say all of that. Say whatever you need to say. He stared at her. Why? Because I'm your wife, and because I'm here, and because whether you believe it or not, I actually care what happens to you. You shouldn't. Too late. They looked at each other across the study, across all the distance they'd built and maintained and weaponized. I don't know how to do this, Adrian said finally. The connection thing. Whatever you want from me. Then we'll figure it out together. I'll disappoint you. Probably. I'll disappoint you too. That's how relationships work. This isn't a relationship. It's an arrangement. It could be more. Could it? He sounded genuinely curious, like the idea had never occurred to him. If we let it. Adrian was quiet for a long time. Then, I'll try. I can't promise I'll be good at it, but I'll try. It wasn't a declaration of love. It wasn't even particularly warm. But it was something, a crack in the wall, a possibility. That's all I'm asking, Lydia said. The change wasn't dramatic. Adrian didn't suddenly become warm and affectionate. He didn't move into her wing or start joining her for breakfast or any of the romantic gestures Lydia had daydreamed about as a girl. But he tried. Small things. Asking her how the gardens were progressing, joining her for dinner even when there were no guests to impress. Once, she found a book on rose cultivation on her bedside table. No note, but she knew who'd left it. It wasn't much, but it was more than nothing. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, the manor started to feel less like a prison and more like a place where two people were trying, however imperfectly, to build something that might someday resemble a life. The roses in the conservatory bloomed. The days grew slightly longer, and Lydia allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this marriage didn't have to be the death sentence she'd feared. She should have known better. Hope, in houses like Blackthorn Manor, was just another thing waiting to be taken away. 2 months became 3, and the small changes Adrian had promised began to feel almost normal. He joined her for dinner 3 times a week now, sometimes 4. They didn't talk about anything profound, mostly just estate business and mundane observations about the weather, but it was conversation. It was presence. It was something other than the suffocating silence that had defined their first weeks together. Lydia learned things about him in fragments. He hated Brussels sprouts. He'd broken his arm falling from a tree when he was 9. He could play piano but refused to do so in front of anyone. He read obsessively, philosophy, history, agricultural journals, like he was trying to consume all the knowledge in the world and make sense of it. And he was watching her gardens grow. She'd catch him sometimes, standing at the windows overlooking the conservatory, just observing. Once, she'd found him actually inside it, examining a rose bush she'd been particularly proud of. He'd looked almost embarrassed when she walked in. "It's doing well," he'd said awkwardly. "Thank you. You have a gift for this." The compliment had been so unexpected, so genuine, that Lydia had felt something warm bloom in her chest. Progress. Slow, halting, imperfect progress, but progress nonetheless. She'd allowed herself to believe things were getting better. That was her first mistake. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the rest of the post, and left on Adrian's breakfast tray. Lydia was in the conservatory when she heard the crash, the unmistakable sound of china shattering against stone. She ran. Adrian stood in the breakfast room, the letter clutched in one hand, his face pale and rigid. His teacup lay in pieces on the floor, brown liquid seeping across the tiles. "Adrian?" He didn't respond, didn't even seem to hear her. Lydia approached carefully, like he was a wounded animal that might bolt. "What happened? What's wrong?" "Nothing." His voice was flat, dead. "It's handled." "That doesn't look like nothing." He finally looked at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. It was the same emptiness she'd seen on their wedding day, all the small progress they'd made erased in an instant. "I need to go to London," he said. Today. Why? What's in the letter? Estate business. I'll be gone for a week. Maybe 2. Adrian, Mrs. Thorne will see to anything you need. He was already moving toward the door, dismissing her, shutting her out. Adrian, stop! She grabbed his arm, and he froze. Talk to me. Please. Whatever this is, we can't. He pulled his arm free, not roughly, but firmly. This doesn't concern you. The words hit like a slap. After 2 months of careful progress, of learning to exist in the same space without flinching, he was right back to treating her like an inconvenient stranger. I'm your wife. In name only. We both know that. Do we? Her voice was shaking now. Because I thought, these past few weeks, I thought maybe you thought wrong. He wouldn't look at her. I'll send word when I know how long I'll be gone. Then he was moving again, striding out of the breakfast room and leaving her standing there among the broken china and spilled tea, feeling like something vital inside her had just shattered too. She didn't go after him. What would be the point? Instead, she sank into the nearest chair and stared at the mess on the floor, trying to understand what had just happened. Mrs. Thorne appeared a few minutes later with a broom and dustpan. He's leaving, Lydia said numbly. Yes, Your Grace, I heard. Do you know why? The housekeeper's face was carefully neutral. I'm afraid not. But you have suspicions. Mrs. Thorne swept up the broken pieces with practiced efficiency. It's not my place to speculate. Mrs. Thorne, please. I'm drowning here. Give me something. The older woman paused, considering. Then she sighed. There are financial complications with the estate. His Grace handles them, but they weigh on him. That's all I know. Financial complications. The Blackthorne estate was supposed to be one of the wealthiest in the region. That was half the reason Lydia's father had been so eager to arrange the marriage. What kind of complications could make Adrian look like his world was ending? Thank you, Lydia said quietly. By the time she made it back to her rooms, Adrian was already gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Just an empty space where the fragile thing they'd been building used to be. She spent the rest of the day in the conservatory, attacking weeds with more violence than necessary, trying to work out the frustration and hurt in her hands instead of her heart. It didn't work. That night, alone in her wing with nothing but silence for company, Lydia made a decision. She was done being the accommodating, patient wife who waited for scraps of attention. If Adrian wouldn't tell her what was wrong, she'd find out herself. The next morning, she went to his study. It was locked. Mrs. Thorne? She called. The housekeeper appeared within moments. Yes, Your Grace? I need access to the Duke's study. Mrs. Thorne's eyebrows rose fractionally. His Grace isn't here, and I'm the Duchess of this estate. I need to understand what's happening, please. For a long moment, Mrs. Thorne just looked at her. Then she reached into her pocket and produced a key. I didn't give you this. Of course not. The study was exactly as Adrian had left it. Papers scattered across the desk, books stacked haphazardly, the faint smell of whiskey and old leather. Lydia felt like an intruder, but she pushed past the guilt and started searching. The first drawer, correspondence about crop yields and tenant concerns. Normal estate business. The second drawer, contracts, legal documents, nothing immediately alarming. The third drawer was locked. She tried the key Mrs. Thorne had given her. It didn't fit. Lydia sat back, frustrated, and scanned the room. Where would Adrian hide a key to something important? She checked under the desk blotter, in the pen holder, behind the books on the nearest shelf. Nothing. Then she remembered something Mrs. Thorne had said. He'd broken his arm falling from a tree when he was 9. There was a small painting on the wall near the window, a landscape with a massive oak tree. Lydia lifted it off its hook and found a small metal key taped to the back of the frame. Clever, she murmured. The key fit. Inside the locked drawer were letters, dozens of them, all in different hands. Lydia pulled out the first one and started reading. Lord Blackthorne, I write to remind you that the outstanding loan of £15,000 comes due at the end of next month. As previously discussed, failure to remit payment in full will result in foreclosure proceedings on the southern parcels. Her stomach dropped. She grabbed another letter. Your Grace, while I sympathize with your situation, the bank cannot extend further credit without significant collateral. The estate's current debts exceed... Another. Adrian, I'm sorry, but I can't keep quiet about this anymore. What you're doing is unsustainable. The expenditures on maintaining appearances while hemorrhaging money to cover your father's debts, it's going to destroy everything. You need to tell someone. That one was unsigned, but the handwriting was elegant, feminine. Catherine Pemberton, maybe? Lydia kept reading, piece by piece, assembling a picture that made her feel sick. The Blackthorn estate wasn't wealthy. It was drowning. Adrian's father had taken out massive loans against the property to fund what? Gambling debts? Bad investments? The letters didn't specify, just referenced the late Duke's obligations over and over. And when he died, those debts had fallen to his 16-year-old son. Adrian had been fighting to save this place for 12 years, and losing. The most recent letters were worse. Threats of foreclosure, demands for immediate payment. One from a creditor suggesting that if the Duke couldn't pay, perhaps certain assets, like a newly acquired duchess from a desperate family, might be leveraged differently. Lydia felt bile rise in her throat. Her dowry. Her father's debt being cleared. It hadn't been generosity. It had been Adrian buying time, using her family's desperation to stave off his own creditors for a few more months. She was a financial instrument, a stopgap measure, not even a person, just another asset to be managed. The door to the study opened. Lydia spun around, guilt and anger warring in her chest, and found herself face to face with Catherine Pemberton. Well, Catherine said, taking in the scene with undisguised satisfaction, this is awkward. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing, breaking into your husband's private papers? How very bold. Catherine stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Though I suppose you had questions, Adrian's not exactly forthcoming, is he? You need to leave. Oh, I don't think so. We're going to have a conversation, you and I, one that's long overdue. Lydia's hands clenched around the letters. I have nothing to say to you. But I have plenty to say to you, sir. Catherine perched on the edge of Adrian's desk, perfectly at ease. Did you really think this was a love match? That the Duke of Blackthorn suddenly decided to marry some nobody from a failing estate out of the goodness of his heart? Get out. He needed money. You provided access to it. That's all this is. All it's ever been. You don't know anything about my marriage. Catherine laughed, sharp and cruel. I know everything about your marriage. I know Adrian came to me 3 months before he proposed to you, asking if my father might extend him a loan. I know he spent weeks trying every possible avenue to avoid marrying you. I know that when he finally gave in and chose you, it was because your father's debt was just large enough to matter, but not so large that clearing it would bankrupt him completely. You were convenient, Lydia. Nothing more. Each word landed like a blow. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand your place. Catherine stood, smoothing her skirts. Adrian and I have known each other our entire lives. We have history. We have understanding. You're just a temporary solution to a financial problem. And when he's extracted whatever value he can from this arrangement, he'll discard you. That's not true. Isn't it? Where is he right now, Lydia? In London, probably meeting with creditors and trying to figure out how to squeeze a few more months out of this dying estate. Did he tell you that? Did he confide in you at all? Or did he just leave you here to wither away in your little garden while he handles the real business of being Duke? Lydia wanted to argue, wanted to defend Adrian, defend their fragile progress, defend the hope she'd been nurturing. But the letters in her hands told a different story. The locked drawer, the secrets, the way he'd shut her out the moment things got difficult. He's using you, Catherine said softly, almost gently. And the sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. Why do you care? If I'm just a convenient nobody, why go to all this trouble to... Because I'm tired of watching him pretend. Catherine's mask slipped, just for a moment, and Lydia saw real pain underneath. I'm tired of being the one who knows him, who understands him, who's been there through everything and still being passed over for someone he barely looks at. At least be honest about what this is. Don't stand there acting like you have some special claim on him when we both know you don't. Lydia stared at her. You're in love with him. I've been in love with him since we were children, and he knows it. And he still chose you, not because he wants you, but because you were the path of least resistance." Catherine's voice cracked. "So forgive me if I'm not particularly sympathetic to your hurt feelings." The silence stretched between them. Two women trapped in the orbit of a man who couldn't seem to let anyone in. "I'm sorry," Lydia said finally. "I'm sorry he hurt you, but taking it out on me won't change anything." "No, but it makes me feel better." Catherine headed for the door, then paused. "One more thing. The reason Adrian went to London? His largest creditor is threatening to call in everything if he doesn't pay £30,000 by the end of the month. He doesn't have it, which means in 3 weeks, this entire estate, the house, the lands, everything, could be seized, including you. You might want to think about that when you're deciding how much of yourself to invest in this marriage." Then she was gone, leaving Lydia alone with the letters and the crushing weight of reality. £30,000, 3 weeks. She thought about Adrian's face when he'd read that letter, the way all the color had drained from him, the way he'd shut down completely. He'd been carrying this alone for years. And the one time he might have asked for help, he'd chosen to leave instead, because he didn't trust her, didn't see her as a partner, just as another obligation to manage. Lydia carefully returned the letters to the drawer, locked it, and replaced the key behind the painting. Then she walked out of the study and stood in the corridor, trying to figure out what she was supposed to do with this information. She could wait for Adrian to come back and confront him, but he'd been keeping these secrets for 12 years. What made her think he'd suddenly be honest now? She could leave, pack her things, go back to her father, dissolve this farce of a marriage before it dragged her down with the estate. But that would mean giving up, admitting defeat. And something stubborn in her refused to do that. Or she could fight. The idea crystallized slowly. She thought about the gardens she'd brought back to life, the conservatory she'd rebuilt from ruin, the way she'd learned to survive in this cold, unforgiving place by creating something growing and green in the midst of all the stone and silence. Maybe the estate needed the same thing. Maybe Adrian needed the same thing. Maybe she couldn't save him from himself, but she could damn well try to save what he'd been killing himself to protect. Lydia went back to her rooms and started making a list. Over the next week, she threw herself into understanding the estate's operations. She talked to the steward, the groundskeeper, the tenants. She went through the public account books, the ones Adrian hadn't locked away, and started learning how money moved through Blackthorn Manor. What she found was wasteful spending everywhere. Excess staff in roles that could be consolidated, contracts with suppliers that hadn't been renegotiated in years, traditions maintained at enormous cost simply because that's how things had always been done. Adrian had been so focused on holding everything together exactly as his father left it that he'd never stopped to question whether the structure itself was the problem. "Mrs. Thorne," Lydia said one morning, finding the housekeeper in the kitchens, "how many housemaids do we employ?" 12, Your Grace. "And how many did the late Duchess employ?" 8. "So we've added 4 positions in 12 years. Why?" Mrs. Thorne looked uncomfortable. His Grace felt it was important to maintain a certain standard. "A standard we can't afford." Lydia tapped her fingers on the counter. "What if we went back to 8? Would the work still get done?" "It would mean longer hours for the remaining staff. And if we paid them more to compensate." Mrs. Thorne blinked. "I suppose that could work, though His Grace has never. His Grace isn't here, and I'm trying to help, even if he doesn't know it yet." Lydia pulled out her notebook. What other expenses could we trim without compromising the essential operations? They spent the next 2 hours going through everything: the excessive wine cellar, the formal gardens that required a team of 6 to maintain when most of the family's entertaining happened in the conservatory now, the costly London townhouse that Adrian never used. By the end of it, Lydia had identified potential savings of nearly £8,000 a year. Not enough to solve the crisis. Not nearly enough. But it was a start. She wrote everything down in careful detail and tucked the notebook away. When Adrian came back, if he came back, she'd show him, prove that she could be useful, that she was more than just a decorative wife waiting to produce an heir, that she could be a partner if he'd let her. 10 days after Adrian left, Lydia was in the conservatory when one of the housemaids came running. Your Grace, you need to come quickly. What's wrong? It's the Hendersons, the tenants from the East Fields. Their youngest is sick, and they're saying she needs a doctor, but they can't afford. Lydia was already moving. Have someone prepare the carriage and fetch the doctor from the village. Tell him to send the bill to the manor. His Grace usually requires approval before. His Grace isn't here. I'm giving approval. Now go. The Henderson cottage was small and drafty, and the child, barely 5 years old, was burning with fever. Her mother sat beside her, face drawn with worry and exhaustion. Your Grace, Mrs. Henderson said, trying to stand. You shouldn't have. We didn't mean to presume. Sit, Lydia said firmly. Stay with your daughter. The doctor's on his way. We can't pay. You're not going to. Lydia knelt beside the bed, touching the back of her hand to the child's forehead, burning up. Has she been like this long? 3 days. It started as a cough, but then the fever came and Mrs. Henderson's voice broke. We thought it would pass. We didn't want to be a burden. You're not a burden. You're part of this estate. That means you're my responsibility. Lydia looked around the cottage, taking in the cracked windows, the thin walls, the general state of disrepair. How long has the cottage been in this condition? Years, Your Grace. We've asked about repairs, but my husband has been too busy trying to keep the whole estate from collapsing to notice individual problems. Lydia stood. That ends now. When the doctor's done, I'm sending someone to fix your windows and patch your walls. Properly. Mrs. Henderson stared at her. Your Grace, we couldn't possibly. You can, and you will, because children shouldn't get sick from living in houses with gaps in the walls wide enough to let winter in. The doctor arrived 20 minutes later. He examined the child, prescribed medicine, and told Mrs. Henderson to keep her warm and hydrated. Nothing life-threatening, just a bad respiratory infection that needed proper care and time. Lydia stayed until the fever started to break, then made her way back to the manor. But instead of going inside, she walked the estate grounds, really looking at them for the first time. How many other cottages were in disrepair? How many other families were struggling silently because Adrian was too overwhelmed to see them? The estate wasn't just a collection of assets and debts. It was people, lives. And if Adrian lost it to his creditors, all of them would suffer. She couldn't let that happen. That night, Lydia sat down and wrote a letter. Not to Adrian, he'd made it clear he didn't want her interference, but to her father. Father, I need information about estate management, agricultural innovations, and financial restructuring, everything you have, and I need it quickly. I know we've never discussed such matters. You always said they were men's business, but things have changed. I need to understand how to save a dying property before it takes everyone down with it. Please don't ask questions. Just send what I need. Your daughter, Lydia. She sent it off the next morning and tried not to think about how insane this plan was. She was a duchess who'd been married for 3 months, trying to solve financial problems that had stumped her husband for 12 years. It was absurd. But she'd brought a conservatory back from ruin. She'd learned to survive in a house that felt like a tomb. She'd carved out space for herself in a marriage that was never supposed to have room for her. Maybe absurd was her specialty. Adrian returned on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after he'd left. Lydia was in the conservatory when she heard the carriage. She didn't run to greet him, didn't abandon what she was doing. She finished repotting the rose bush she'd been working on, cleaned her tools, and only then made her way back to the house. He was in his study, door closed. She knocked. Come in. He sat behind his desk, looking older than when he'd left. There were shadows under his eyes, new lines around his mouth. He'd lost weight. She could see it in his face, in the way his coat hung slightly loose on his shoulders. Lydia. He didn't stand, didn't smile. I hope everything was managed well in my absence. Formal, distant, like the past 2 months had never happened. Everything was fine, she said evenly. How was London? Productive? Did you resolve your business? His jaw tightened. I'm managing it. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have to give. Lydia closed the door behind her and crossed to his desk. I know about the debts, Adrian. The color drained from his face. What? The loans, the creditors, the 30,000 pounds due at the end of the month. I know. How? He stood abruptly. Did you go through my private papers? Yes. You had no right. I had every right. I'm your wife. This estate is as much my responsibility as yours. This is not your concern. It absolutely is my concern. Do you think I'm just going to sit quietly in my wing while you lose everything? While all the tenants who depend on this estate lose their homes? While you kill yourself trying to fix problems you've been carrying alone for 12 goddamn years? Adrian's hands gripped the edge of his desk. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. For once in this marriage, stop shutting me out and talk to me. I can't. Why not? Because... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. When he spoke again, his voice was raw. Because if I tell you how bad it is, it becomes real, and I can't let it be real. Lydia stared at him. This man who'd seemed so cold, so unreachable, was barely holding himself together. Adrian, she said softly, it's already real. Pretending it isn't won't change that. I know. He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking defeated. I know. She moved around the desk and did something she'd never done before, touched him intentionally, gently, placing her hand on his shoulder. He flinched but didn't pull away. Let me help, she said. Please. You can't fix this. Maybe not, but I can try, and trying together has to be better than you drowning alone. He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Adrian Blackthorne looked genuinely afraid. I don't know how to let people help me, he said. I know, but you're going to have to learn, because I'm not going anywhere, Adrian. I'm your wife. For better or worse, and this definitely qualifies as worse, I'm here. So either work with me or watch me do it anyway, but I'm not standing by while everything falls apart. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then slowly, something shifted in his expression. What did you have in mind? Lydia pulled out her notebook and spread it open on Adrian's desk. He looked at the columns of numbers and notes like they were written in a foreign language. What is this? Potential cost savings. 8,000 pounds a year if we restructure how the household runs. She pointed to the first section. We're employing more staff than we need, paying for services we don't use, maintaining properties that sit empty. Your father built this estate to show wealth. You've been maintaining that illusion while it bleeds you dry. Adrian scanned the pages, his expression unreadable. You did all this in 2 weeks? I had motivation and time, and access to people who actually know how things work around here. She flipped to another page. The tenants' cottages are falling apart. The Henderson girl nearly died from pneumonia because their windows don't seal properly. We're spending money on marble floors and crystal chandeliers, while the people who actually keep this estate running are living in conditions that would shame a workhouse. I didn't know. I know you didn't. You've been so focused on the big picture that you stopped seeing the details. She wasn't trying to be cruel, just honest. But that ends now. We fix the cottages. We renegotiate the supplier contracts. We sell the London townhouse you never use, and the parcels of land that cost more to maintain than they generate. The land has been in my family for generations. And it'll be in someone else's family by next month if we don't find 30,000 pounds. Lydia met his eyes. Legacy means nothing if you lose everything trying to preserve it. Adrian was quiet for a long time, his fingers tracing the edge of her notebook. This still doesn't solve the immediate problem. Even with these savings, we don't have enough to pay what's owed. I know. That's why we need to talk about other options. There aren't any other options. I've exhausted them all. Have you considered asking for help? His laugh was bitter. From who? Every creditor I have is already demanding payment. My family is either dead or useless, and I'm not going to beg from the neighboring estates like some kind of charity case. What about restructuring the debt? Negotiating new terms? I've tried. They want their money now, not promises of future payment. Lydia took a breath. Then we sell assets, not the land. I understand why you can't do that, but there are other things. Art, furniture, your mother's jewelry collection. Adrian's head snapped up. No. Adrian, I said no. His voice was sharp. That collection is the only thing I have left of her. I'm not selling it to pay for my father's mistakes, even if it means losing everything else. Even then, she wanted to argue, wanted to point out that objects were just objects, that his mother would probably prefer he survive than cling to some jewelry she'd never wear again. But she could see in his face that this wasn't about logic. It was about the last thread connecting him to something good in his past. Okay, she said quietly. No jewelry. But we need something. Some way to bridge the gap between what we can cut and what we owe. I'm working on it. How? Adrian stood and walked to the window, his back to her. There's a potential investor, someone interested in partnering on the estate's agricultural output. If I can convince him to advance the capital. Who? Lord Ashford. He's in London, which is why I went. We've been negotiating terms. Lydia's stomach sank. She knew that name. Lord Ashford was notorious, wealthy, ruthless, and known for acquiring failing estates at pennies on the pound and then stripping them for parts. Tell me you didn't agree to anything binding. Not yet, but if he comes through with the 30,000, I won't have much choice about the terms. Adrian, he'll own you. He'll own the estate. Everything you've been fighting to save will belong to him. At least it won't belong to the creditors. He turned back to face her. I know it's not ideal, but I'm running out of time and options. There has to be another way. If you can think of one, I'm listening. The challenge hung in the air between them. Lydia's mind raced through possibilities, rejecting each one as quickly as it formed. Loans required collateral they didn't have. Selling assets took time they didn't have. And asking for help from family or friends assumed Adrian had either, which he clearly didn't. Unless. My father, she said slowly. Your father's estate is barely solvent. That's why he married you off to me in the first place. Not my father's money. My father's connections. She moved closer to Adrian, the idea crystallizing. He knows people, investors, merchants, landowners. People who might be interested in legitimate partnerships, not just acquiring a failing estate on the cheap. Why would they help us? Because my father owes me. He sold me to save himself. The least he can do is use his network to help save the estate that's now mine too. She grabbed Adrian's arm. Let me write to him. Let me at least try. Lydia, what do you have to lose? If it doesn't work, you can still make your deal with Ashford. But if it does work, you keep control. You keep your legacy. You keep everything you've been fighting for. Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw the moment he made the decision. Okay, he said. Try. She wrote the letter that night, carefully crafting each word to strike the right balance between desperation and dignity. She needed her father to take this seriously, to understand that this wasn't some frivolous request. The estate was dying, Adrian was drowning, and she needed help. The letter went out the next morning, and then they waited. The waiting was agony. Every day that passed was one day closer to the deadline. Adrian threw himself into work, trying to find any additional savings, any overlooked assets. Lydia continued her reforms, consolidating staff, renegotiating contracts, personally overseeing the cottage repairs. They worked side by side now, not quite partners, but not quite strangers anymore either. Something had shifted between them. The walls Adrian had built weren't gone, but they had cracks. And through those cracks, Lydia caught glimpses of the person underneath, exhausted, terrified, but still fighting. 1 week passed, then another. The response came on a Wednesday, delivered by special courier. Lydia tore it open with shaking hands, Adrian watching from across his study. She read it once, twice, then she looked up. He found someone, a consortium of investors interested in agricultural improvements. They want to meet with you next week in London to discuss terms. Adrian's expression didn't change. That's good. That's great. Adrian, this could solve everything. It could, or it could be another Lord Ashford situation dressed up in prettier language. He took the letter from her, scanning it. I've learned not to get my hopes up. Well, I haven't. Lydia moved around the desk. Let yourself hope for 5 minutes. Let yourself believe this might actually work. And if it doesn't, then we deal with it. Together. She placed her hand over his where it rested on the desk. But you're not alone in this anymore. Whatever happens, we face it together. His fingers curled around hers. The first time he'd ever reached for her voluntarily. It was clumsy, uncertain, but it was real. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Then it was gone, but Lydia had seen it. Progress. The meeting was set for the following Tuesday. Adrian left for London on Monday morning, and this time he told her where he was going and why. This time he kissed her forehead before he left. Awkward and stiff, but deliberate. This time felt different. Lydia threw herself into estate work while he was gone, trying to keep her mind occupied. She visited more tenant cottages, cataloged more wasteful expenses, spent hours in the conservatory working with the roses that had become her refuge. Catherine Pemberton showed up on Thursday. "You're still here," Catherine said, standing in the conservatory doorway. "I'm surprised." Lydia didn't look up from the rose bush she was pruning. "Why would I not be?" "I thought surely by now you'd have realized this was a lost cause. Adrian's going to lose everything. When he does, he'll have nothing to offer you. I assumed you'd have cut your losses and run. Then you assumed wrong." How noble. Catherine stepped into the conservatory, her expensive dress utterly out of place among the dirt and plants. Or how stupid. I can't decide which. "You can think whatever you like. It won't change anything." "Won't it?" Catherine picked up a gardening tool, examining it like it was some kind of curiosity. "I spoke with Lord Ashford yesterday. He mentioned Adrian came to him, desperate, practically begging." Lydia's hands stilled. "Adrian is exploring options. That's different from begging." "Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like your husband is about to sign away his entire inheritance to avoid admitting he failed. And you're here playing in the dirt, pretending you can fix it with cost savings and cottage repairs. Get out." "Gladly. But first, I thought you should know, Lord Ashford mentioned something interesting. He said if Adrian agrees to the partnership, part of the terms include dissolving the current marriage. Something about wanting a business partner unencumbered by complications." The words hit like a physical blow. "You're lying." "Am I?" Catherine set down the tool. "Think about it, Lydia. You're a financial drain Adrian can't afford. Your dowry is already spent. You haven't produced an heir. What purpose do you serve? If Ashford demands you go as part of the deal, do you really think Adrian will choose you over saving his estate? He wouldn't. He would. Because duty comes first. It always has. You were never anything more than a temporary solution to a permanent problem. And now that you've served your purpose, you've become expendable." Lydia wanted to argue, wanted to defend Adrian and their fragile progress, and the tiny hopeful thing that had started growing between them. But Catherine's words burrowed into all her deepest fears. "Why are you doing this?" Lydia asked. "What do you get from hurting me?" Catherine's expression shifted, something raw and painful flashing across her face before the mask returned. "Because watching you believe in him breaks my heart. I spent years believing in Adrian Blackthorne, believing that if I was patient enough, loyal enough, perfect enough, he'd finally see me. And he never did. He just used me when convenient and discarded me when I wasn't. So, yes, I want you to hurt the way I hurt. I want you to understand what it feels like to give everything to someone who will never give anything back. That's not love. That's obsession. Maybe, but at least I know what I'm dealing with. You're still pretending this has a happy ending." Catherine left, and Lydia stood alone in the conservatory, dirt under her fingernails and doubt eating away at her resolve. Adrian wouldn't do that. Wouldn't agree to terms that required ending their marriage. Would he? She thought about the way he'd kissed her forehead before leaving, the way his fingers had curled around hers, the small, careful steps towards something real. But she also thought about the desperation in his eyes, the 12 years of fighting alone, the weight of legacy and duty that had shaped every decision he'd ever made. If it came down to choosing between her and the estate, what would he pick? Lydia didn't let herself answer that question. Instead, she went back to work, fixed what she could fix, controlled what she could control, and tried not to think about the fact that everything she'd been building might be about to crumble anyway. Adrian returned 3 days later, well past midnight. Lydia heard the carriage and went down to meet him, still in her dressing gown. He stood in the entrance hall, looking utterly destroyed. "Adrian?" He didn't answer, just stood there, staring at nothing. "What happened? Did the meeting—" "They wanted to help." His voice was flat. "The consortium. They were legitimate, fair terms, reasonable interest rates, everything we needed." That's wonderful. Adrian, They withdrew the offer. Lydia's stomach dropped. "What? Why?" "Someone got to them first, told them the estate was too far gone, too risky, convinced them I was a bad investment." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were dead. "It was Ashford. He found out about the meeting and poisoned it before it could happen." But we can find others. There have to be other investors. There's no time. The payment is due in 8 days. Ashford knows that. He's backed me into a corner, and the only way out is through him." "Then we don't take it. We find another way." "There is no other way." The words came out harsh, anguished. "I've been trying to find another way for 12 years, Lydia. This is it. This is all there is." She reached for him, but he stepped back. "Don't." "Adrian, I need to be alone." He walked past her, heading for his study, and Lydia felt something inside her crack wide open. She'd been so careful, so patient, so determined to help, and it wasn't enough. Nothing she did was ever going to be enough. She went back to her rooms and didn't sleep, just stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind attack the windows and thought about Catherine's words. "You've become expendable." The next morning, Lydia found Adrian in his study, papers spread across every surface. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "I need to know something," she said from the doorway. He glanced up. "What?" "Catherine told me that Lord Ashford's terms include dissolving our marriage. Is that true?" Adrian's face went carefully blank. "Where did you hear that?" "Answer the question." "It's complicated." "It's a yes or no question, Adrian. Did Ashford demand that you end our marriage as part of the deal?" Silence. "Adrian." "He suggested it might be beneficial, a fresh start, unencumbered by existing complications." "Complications? That's what I am?" "That's not what I— And were you considering it?" Her voice was shaking now. "Were you actually considering agreeing to end our marriage so you could save your precious estate?" "I didn't agree to anything." "That's not an answer." Adrian stood, moving around the desk. "What do you want me to say?" "Yes, I considered it. For about 5 minutes, I considered whether it might be worth it to throw me away like garbage, to free you from this mess." The words exploded out of him. "You didn't ask for any of this, Lydia. You got dragged into my disaster of a life, into an estate that's drowning, into a marriage with someone who doesn't know how to be a husband. If letting you go means you escape this nightmare, maybe that's the kindest thing I could do. You don't get to make that choice for me. Someone has to make choices. Someone has to do something other than pretend we can fix this with cost savings and tenant cottage repairs." "Is that what you think I've been doing? Pretending?" "I think you've been trying to save something that's already dead, and I think I've been letting you because I didn't want to admit that I've already lost." The words hung in the air between them, brutal and final. "So that's it," Lydia said quietly. "You're giving up." "I'm being realistic." "You're being a coward." Adrian flinched like she'd slapped him. "I have spent 3 months in this house," Lydia continued, her voice low and fierce. 3 months learning to survive with a husband who could barely look at me. 3 months building something from nothing, fixing what was broken, trying to prove that I could be useful, that I could matter. And the moment things get hard, really hard, you decide it's easier to throw it all away than to keep fighting. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You're so afraid of failing that you'd rather surrender on your own terms than risk losing while trying. You'd rather destroy everything yourself than let someone else do it. And you're willing to destroy me in the process. That's not fair. None of this is fair." She was shouting now, months of frustration and hurt pouring out. "I didn't ask to be married to someone who treats me like a financial transaction. I didn't ask to fall for someone who can't even admit I exist as a person and not just an obligation. But I did it anyway. I tried anyway. And you're just going to throw it all away because it's easier than being honest about what you actually want." The silence that followed was deafening. "What I want doesn't matter," Adrian said finally. "It never has." "Then make it matter. For once in your life, Adrian, choose something because you want it, not because it's your duty or your legacy or whatever other excuse you use to avoid feeling anything real." "I don't know how." "Then learn, or let me go. But don't stand there and pretend this is for my benefit when we both know you're just scared." She turned to leave, and his voice stopped her. "I am scared." Lydia paused but didn't turn around. "I'm terrified," Adrian continued, "of losing the estate, of failing my family's legacy, of becoming my father, of letting you see how completely broken I am and having you realize you married someone who has nothing to offer. I'm scared of all of it, and I don't know what to do with that." Finally, she turned. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of all the armor he usually wore. "You don't have to do anything with it," she said. "You just have to stop running from it. Stop pushing me away every time you feel something. Stop making decisions for both of us because you're too afraid to trust me with the truth. And if the truth is that I don't know how to save this, that I'm out of options and time, and I'm about to lose everything, then we lose it together. We figure out what comes next together. But we don't surrender, Adrian. Not yet. Not while there's still a chance." "What chance?" "Ashford is the only option left. Then we renegotiate. We find terms we can live with, or we reject him entirely and face the consequences." She moved closer. "But we do it as partners, as equals, not with you making unilateral decisions about my life because you think you know what's best for me." Adrian stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're stronger than I am," he said quietly. "I'm not. I'm just less afraid of failing." "How?" "Because I've already lost everything once. My home, my future, my illusions about what marriage would be. And I survived. So losing again doesn't scare me the way it scares you. What scares me is never trying in the first place." Adrian was silent for a long moment. Then he did something he'd never done before. He closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms. It was clumsy and desperate, and his hands were shaking, but he held her like she was the only solid thing in his world. "I don't want to lose you," he said against her hair. "I don't want to sign papers that erase you from my life like you never mattered. You matter. You matter more than you should, and it terrifies me." Lydia wrapped her arms around him, feeling his heart hammer against her chest. "Then don't lose me. Fight for this. Fight for us. Not just the estate or the legacy or whatever. Fight for the possibility that this marriage could actually be something real." "I don't know if I can." "Try. That's all I'm asking. Just try." He pulled back just enough to look at her, and there was something vulnerable and raw in his expression. "If I do this, if I reject Ashford and we lose everything, you need to know what that means. No estate, no title, no money, just me. Whoever that is, without all the rest." "I know. And you'd stay, even if it all falls apart." "Where else would I go? You're my husband, Adrian. For better or worse. I meant those vows, even if you didn't." "I meant them," he said quietly. "I just didn't know what they meant until now." Then he kissed her, really kissed her. Not the awkward forehead peck from before, but a real kiss, desperate and honest and full of everything he'd been too afraid to say. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lydia felt something shift. The wall between them hadn't come down completely, but it had cracked wide enough to let light through. "Okay," Adrian said. "We fight. Together." "Together," she agreed. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Lydia compiled every cost-saving measure she'd identified, every potential revenue stream, every argument for why the estate could recover with time and proper management. Adrian reached out to every contact he had, looking for alternative funding sources, better terms, any leverage he could use. It wasn't enough. They both knew it wasn't enough, but they tried anyway. The night before the final payment was due, they sat together in Adrian's study, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups and the crushing reality of their situation. "Tomorrow," Adrian said, "Ashford will come for his answer. And you'll tell him no, and we'll lose everything." Lydia laced her fingers through his. "Not everything. We'll still have each other." That's not much of a consolation prize. It's enough for me. Adrian looked at their joined hands. I wish I'd met you years ago, before all of this. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe. Or maybe we needed all of this to find each other. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I don't regret marrying you, Adrian. Even with everything that's happened, I don't regret it. You might tomorrow. No, I won't. They sat in silence, holding each other in the wreckage of their attempts, waiting for morning and whatever it would bring. The knock came at dawn. Lydia woke in Adrian's study. They'd both fallen asleep in their chairs, to the sound of someone pounding on the front door. Adrian jerked awake beside her, disoriented. What? The pounding continued. They made their way to the entrance hall, where Mrs. Thorne was already opening the door. A courier stood there, rain-soaked and breathing hard. Message for the Duke of Blackthorn, he gasped. Urgent, from London. Adrian took the sealed letter, his hands steady despite everything. Lydia watched as he broke the seal and read, watched as the color drained from his face. Adrian? What is it? He looked up at her, and his expression was something she'd never seen before. Shock, disbelief, and something that might have been hope. It's from the consortium, the investors my father-in-law found. His voice was shaking. They received new information about the estate, about our cost-saving measures and the improvements we've been making. Someone sent them documentation of everything we've done. What? Who would? They're interested again. They want to meet today, in London. He grabbed her arms. Lydia, they're offering £40,000, enough to pay the debts and have capital left over for improvements. That's impossible. Who would send them that information? Who even knew about it besides us? A voice came from behind them. I did. They turned. Catherine Pemberton stood in the entrance hall, dripping wet, looking like she'd ridden through the storm. Catherine? Adrian stared. What are you? I sent them everything. Every report Lydia compiled, every cost-saving measure, every cottage repair. I told them what you were trying to do, how you were fighting. Catherine's voice was steady despite the water streaming from her clothes. I couldn't watch you lose everything. Not like this. But you said, at the conservatory, you told me. Lydia couldn't finish the sentence. I said a lot of things I didn't mean, because I was angry and hurt and jealous that you had what I wanted. Catherine's eyes were bright with tears, or rain, impossible to tell. But watching you both fight for this, fight for each other, I realized I was trying to destroy something beautiful just because I couldn't have it. And I couldn't live with that. Catherine, Adrian started. Don't thank me or apologize or whatever you're about to do. Just go to London, take the meeting, save your estate and your marriage, and build something worth keeping. She turned toward the door. I need to leave. Wait, Lydia said. Why? Why did you really do this? Catherine stopped, her back to them. Because maybe if I help save one love story, it'll make up for the one I destroyed by holding on too long. She looked back over her shoulder. Goodbye, Adrian. Lydia, I hope you make it. Then she was gone, disappearing back into the storm as quickly as she'd arrived. Lydia and Adrian stood in stunned silence. We need to go, Adrian said finally. Now. If we leave immediately, we can make London by early afternoon. Adrian, what if it's another trap? What if Ashford? Then we deal with it. Together, like you said. He grabbed her hand. But we have to try. She nodded, and they were moving, shouting for Mrs. Thorne to prepare the carriage, grabbing coats and documents in each other's hands like lifelines. The storm was getting worse, rain lashing the countryside in horizontal sheets. The carriage lurched and swayed on muddy roads, and more than once Lydia thought they'd overturn entirely. We should stop, she said, watching lightning split the sky. Wait for the storm to pass. We can't. The meeting is at 3. If we don't make it, if we die trying to make it, the meeting won't matter. Adrian's jaw was set. We're not going to die. You can't promise that. Watch me. They pressed on, the horses struggling against wind that felt like it wanted to push them back to Blackthorn Manor and keep them there forever. Lydia gripped Adrian's hand and prayed to whoever might be listening that they'd survive long enough to see whether this desperate gamble would pay off. Somewhere near the outskirts of London, The carriage wheel hit a rut. The wood splintered. The carriage lurched violently sideways. Lydia felt herself thrown against the door, felt Adrian's arm wrap around her, pulling her back. The world tilted, and then everything was noise and chaos and the sensation of falling. They hit the ground hard. The carriage flipped entirely, landing on its side with a crash that knocked the air from Lydia's lungs. For a moment, everything was still. Then Adrian was moving, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Lydia, look at me. Are you hurt?" She took inventory, bruised, shaken, terrified, but nothing broken. "I'm okay. You?" "Fine." He was already kicking at the door, trying to force it open. It wouldn't budge. "We need to get out. The horses—" The horses were screaming, tangled in their traces. The driver was shouting something Lydia couldn't make out over the storm. And above it all, she could hear Adrian's watch ticking in his pocket, each second another moment closer to missing their chance. "The window," she said. "We can climb through." Together, they managed to smash the window and crawl out into the storm. The driver was already working to free the horses, cursing steadily. The carriage was destroyed. There was no way it would roll again. "How far to London?" Lydia asked. 10 miles, maybe less." Adrian looked at the sky, at the storm showing no signs of breaking. "We can't make it on foot, not in time. Then we ride." "What?" "The horses. Once they're free, we ride them." "Lydia, you can't— Have you ever ridden bareback in a storm?" "No, but I'm about to learn. Unless you have a better idea?" He didn't. 20 minutes later, they were mounted on 2 of the carriage horses, Adrian on one and Lydia on the other, racing toward London through sheets of rain that made it nearly impossible to see. Lydia clung to the horse's mane, her legs burning from the effort of staying on, every muscle screaming. She'd never been so terrified in her life, but she'd also never felt more alive. They made London with 30 minutes to spare, arriving at the investor's office soaked through and probably looking like they'd been dragged behind the horses rather than riding them. A clerk took one look at them and tried to turn them away. "The Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn," Adrian said firmly. "We have a meeting at 3. The clerk's eyes widened. He led them to a private room where they tried desperately to make themselves presentable. Lydia's dress was ruined, mud-stained and torn. Adrian's coat was missing entirely, lost somewhere on the road. They looked like disaster personified. "Maybe this was a mistake," Lydia whispered. "Too late now." Adrian took her hand. "Whatever happens, we tried. We fought. That's more than I've done in 12 years. The door opened. 3 men entered, well-dressed, businesslike, looking at Adrian and Lydia with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical. The lead investor, Mr. Thornton, gestured to the chairs. "Your Graces, I apologize, but we weren't sure you'd make it. The storm. We made it," Adrian said. "That's what matters." Thornton exchanged glances with his associates. "Indeed. Well, shall we discuss terms?" What followed was the most intense 2 hours of Lydia's life. Numbers and percentages and contract clauses flew back and forth. Adrian negotiated with a fierceness she'd never seen in him, fighting for every advantage, refusing to give ground on anything that would compromise the estate's future. And when they tried to exclude her from the discussion, perhaps the Duchess would be more comfortable waiting outside, Adrian shut it down immediately. "My wife stays. She's as much a part of this estate as I am. Anything discussed here involves her equally." Lydia had never loved him more. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Thornton leaned back in his chair. "I think we have an agreement. £40,000 in capital, to be repaid over 15 years at 4% interest. In exchange, we take a 20% stake in the estate's agricultural profits. You maintain full ownership and control. And the current debts? Paid in full as soon as the contract is signed." Adrian looked at Lydia. She nodded. "Then we have a deal," Adrian said. They signed the papers as the sun was setting, the storm finally breaking outside the windows. When it was done, when the last signature was in place, Lydia felt something in her chest unclench for the first time in months. They'd done it. Against all odds, against every expectation, they'd actually done it. Outside on the rain-washed streets of London, Adrian pulled her into his arms and kissed her like the world was ending and beginning all at once. "We did it," he said against her mouth. You did it. We did it together. I love you." The words tumbled out, unplanned and honest. I should have said it weeks ago. I should have said it the first time you stood in that conservatory covered in dirt and looking at me like I was worth saving. I love you, Lydia. Completely. Terrifyingly. I love you. Lydia felt tears mix with the rain on her face. I love you too. Even when you're impossible. Even when you're scared. I love you. They stood there in the middle of London, soaked and exhausted, and holding each other like they'd never let go. But neither of them saw the figure watching from across the street. Lord Ashford stood in the shadows, his face twisted with rage as he watched them celebrate their victory. He'd been outmaneuvered, outplayed, made to look like a fool. And he wasn't the type of man who forgot that kind of humiliation. He turned and walked away, already planning. They thought they'd won, thought they'd saved everything. They had no idea what was coming. The journey back to Blackthorn Manor took 2 days instead of 1. They'd had to hire a new carriage and wait out the worst of the storm. By the time they rolled through the manor gates, exhausted and still wearing their ruined clothes, word had already spread. Mrs. Thorne met them at the door, her normally composed face showing actual emotion. Your Grace, your Graces. The staff has been worried sick. When the driver returned with the damaged carriage and said you'd gone ahead on horseback, "We're fine, Mrs. Thorne." Adrian helped Lydia down, his hand lingering at her waist in a way that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago. "And we have news. Gather everyone in the main hall, staff, tenants, everyone. I want them to hear this together." Within the hour, the entrance hall was packed. Servants lined the walls, tenants crowded near the door, all of them watching Adrian and Lydia with expressions ranging from curious to terrified. Everyone knew the deadline had passed. Everyone assumed the worst. Adrian stood at the top of the main staircase, Lydia beside him. He looked at the faces of the people who depended on this estate, who depended on him, and Lydia saw him straighten his shoulders. "I know there have been rumors," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "about the estate's financial difficulties, about debts coming due. And I want you to know that those rumors were true." A murmur ran through the crowd. "My father left this estate in debt, significant debt, and I have spent the last 12 years trying to manage it alone, in secret, because I thought that was what a duke was supposed to do. Bear the burden, maintain appearances, never show weakness." He paused. "I was wrong." Lydia reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. "The truth is, I nearly lost everything. If it hadn't been for my wife—" His voice caught slightly on the word, and Lydia felt her throat tighten. "If it hadn't been for the Duchess's insight and determination and refusal to let me surrender, we would have lost it all. She identified savings I'd been too proud to see. She reached out to connections I didn't know we had. She fought for this estate when I had given up fighting for it myself." All eyes turned to Lydia. She wanted to disappear. "But we didn't lose it," Adrian continued. "Yesterday we secured funding from investors who believe in what we're building here, enough to pay the debts and make the improvements this estate desperately needs, starting with the tenant cottages." The silence broke into surprised murmurs, then scattered applause. "You'll see changes over the coming months. Some positions will be consolidated. Some traditions will end, some things will be different. But the goal is the same as it's always been, to make this estate sustainable, not just for this generation, but for the next, and the one after that." He looked down at Lydia, and there was something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Pride, maybe, or gratitude, or love. "I know I haven't been the duke you deserved. I've been absent, closed off, more concerned with maintaining the illusion of strength than actually being strong. That changes today. From now on, decisions about this estate will be made by both of us. Transparently. With input from the people who know it best. All of you." Mrs. Henderson from the East Field spoke up, her voice shaking. "Your Grace? Does this mean the cottage repairs will continue?" "It means the cottage repairs are the priority. Before any other improvements, we fix what's broken, starting with your homes." The applause was louder this time, more genuine. Lydia saw relief and disbelief warring on faces throughout the crowd. When the gathering finally dispersed, Mrs. Thorne approached them with something close to a smile. Well done, your graces, both of you. Thank you, Mrs. Thorne. Adrian's hand was still in Lydia's. He hadn't let go since taking it on the stairs. Can you have our things moved? Moved, your grace? I'll be relocating to the Duchess's wing permanently. Mrs. Thorne's smile became real. About time. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Adrian and Lydia shared a room. Not because duty demanded it, but because they wanted to. They lay in her bed, their bed now, talking about everything and nothing until the early hours. I meant what I said, Adrian murmured against her hair. About making decisions together. I don't know how to do this, the partnership thing, but I want to learn. We'll figure it out as we go. Lydia traced patterns on his chest, still half convinced she was dreaming. Make mistakes, fix them, try again. I've made so many mistakes already. Then you're getting practice for making better ones. He laughed, an actual genuine laugh that Lydia felt rumble through his chest. How are you always so optimistic? Someone has to be. You're brooding enough for both of us. I don't brood. You absolutely brood. It's very dramatic. He kissed the top of her head. I love you. I know, you told me, in London, in the rain, very romantically. I should say it more. You should. I like hearing it. I love you, he said again, testing the words. I love you. I love... Okay, now you're just showing off. They fell asleep tangled together, and when Lydia woke in the morning to find Adrian still there, not fled to his study or disappeared into estate business, she let herself believe that maybe this was real, that maybe they'd actually turned a corner. She should have known better than to trust peace. The letter arrived 3 days later, delivered by a courier who insisted on waiting for a response. Lydia was in the conservatory when Mrs. Thorne found her. Your Grace, there's a letter. The courier says it's urgent. Lydia wiped dirt from her hands and took the envelope. No return address. Expensive paper. She broke the seal. Duchess Blackthorne, I write to inform you of certain irregularities regarding your recent investment agreement. It has come to my attention that the funding secured from the Thornton Consortium may have been obtained under false pretenses, specifically through the misrepresentation of the estate's actual financial condition. I'm sure this was an oversight on your part. However, should the consortium become aware of these discrepancies, they may choose to void the contract. Unless, of course, we can come to an alternative arrangement. I will be at Blackthorn Manor tomorrow at noon to discuss terms. Your servant, Lord Ashford. Lydia's hands shook. She read it again, trying to parse the threat beneath the polite language. False pretenses, misrepresentation. He was claiming they'd lied to secure the funding, which was absurd. Everything they'd provided the consortium had been accurate. She'd checked the numbers herself 3 times. But Ashford didn't need the accusation to be true. He just needed it to cast enough doubt that the investors got nervous. She found Adrian in his study. He read the letter once, then slammed it down on his desk. That bastard. Can he actually do this? Can he convince the consortium we lied? He can try. If he manufactures enough doubt, if he brings them doctored evidence or false witnesses, Adrian's jaw tightened. The contract has a provision for fraud. If they believe we misrepresented the estate's condition, they can void everything. So we're back where we started. Worse, because now we've already paid the creditors with the consortium's money. If they pull out, we'll owe both the consortium and whoever Ashford gets to front him the funds. We'll lose everything twice. Lydia sank into a chair. What does he want? Control. He wanted the estate, and we took it from him. This is his revenge. So when he comes tomorrow, he'll make demands. Probably want a stake in the estate, or management authority, something that gives him power over us. And if we refuse? Adrian looked at her, his expression grim. Then he destroys us. Makes good on his threat to poison the consortium relationship. We lose everything anyway, but this time it's public, humiliating, a spectacle. We can't let him do this. I don't know how to stop him. Lydia stood, pacing the study. There has to be something, some way to prove he's the one lying, not us. He's too smart to leave evidence, and he has resources we don't, lawyers, connections, the kind of power that comes with old money and no conscience. Then we fight dirty too. Adrian looked at her. What do you mean? You said he wanted control, power over us. What if we take away his leverage before he can use it? How? Lydia's mind was racing. The consortium invested because they believed in what we're building, because they saw the improvements we're making, the cost savings, the sustainability plan. What if we show them more? What if we prove that not only were we honest, but we're exceeding expectations? In 3 days? Lydia, that's possible. Maybe. She grabbed his hands. We implement everything immediately. Every cost-saving measure, every cottage repair, every improvement we promised. We document it all. And when Ashford shows up tomorrow making accusations, we show the consortium real, tangible proof that we're not just honest, we're succeeding. That's insane. You have a better idea? He didn't. They worked through the night. Adrian sent riders to every tenant, every supplier, every worker on the estate. Lydia drafted schedules and supply lists. Mrs. Thorne mobilized the household staff like a general preparing for war. By dawn, the entire estate was in motion. Carpenters descended on the tenant cottages, replacing windows and patching walls. The staff restructuring went into effect immediately. Roles were consolidated. Wages were increased for those remaining. Lydia personally oversaw the renegotiation of supplier contracts using every piece of leverage she'd identified. It was chaos. Beautiful, purposeful chaos. The tenants stared in disbelief as workers swarmed their homes, making repairs that had been needed for years. Mrs. Henderson grabbed Lydia's hands when she came to inspect the Eastfield cottages. Your Grace, I don't understand. Yesterday you said it would take weeks to organize all this. We don't have weeks. We have today. Lydia squeezed her hands. Is there anything else your cottage needs? Anything at all? The roof leaks. Has for 2 years. Consider it fixed. By mid-morning, word had spread beyond the estate. Neighboring landowners started showing up, curious about the sudden flurry of activity. Lydia intercepted them at the gates, turning curiosity into opportunity. Lord Pemberton, thank you for coming. Catherine's father looked bewildered. I wasn't aware I was invited. I just heard rumors about... What is all this? Estate improvements. We're implementing our new sustainability plan. Actually, I'm glad you're here. We're renegotiating supplier contracts. If you're interested, we might be able to arrange better rates for both our estates through bulk ordering. What? Grain, timber, coal. We're dealing directly with manufacturers now, cutting out the middlemen. The savings are substantial. If you want in, I can have our steward draw up terms. You're offering me a business partnership? I'm offering you better prices and a chance to strengthen both our estates. Purely practical. She smiled. Consider it a thank you for your daughter's help. Lord Pemberton blinked. Catherine helped you? She did. Significantly. You should be proud of her. By the time Pemberton left, with a preliminary agreement in hand, 2 other neighboring landowners had arrived with similar questions. Lydia handled each one with the same approach: transparency, practical benefits, mutual advantage. Adrian found her around noon, covered in dust and looking slightly manic. What are you doing? Building alliances. If Ashford tries to destroy us, I want witnesses who can testify that we're not frauds, we're innovators, that we're making things better, not worse. By offering business deals to our neighbors? By proving we're worth investing in, that we're not desperate failures clinging to a dying legacy. We're building something new. She grabbed his face. Trust me. He kissed her, quick and fierce. I do, completely. Good. Now go. The cottage inspections need oversight, and I don't trust anyone but you to catch structural problems before they become disasters. They separated, each attacking different fronts of their impossible plan. As the sun began to set, Lydia stood in the conservatory, her refuge, her proving ground, and took stock. In 18 hours, they'd accomplished what should have taken weeks. The cottages weren't perfect, but they were dramatically improved. The staff restructuring was in place. The supplier contracts were renegotiated, and they had documentation of every single change, every cost saving, every improvement. It still might not be enough, but it was more than they'd had yesterday. Adrian found her there, among the roses that had been her first act of rebellion against the dying estate. It's done. All of it. The tenants are in shock, Half of them think we've lost our minds. Maybe we have. Lydia leaned against him, exhausted. Tomorrow, when Ashford comes, we show him we're not afraid, that we're not the same desperate people he tried to exploit. And if he still goes through with his threat, then we deal with it. Together. Adrian turned her to face him. But I think we have a chance. What we've done today, it's evidence that we're serious, that we're committed. The consortium will see that. I hope you're right. Me too. They slept little that night, both too keyed up with nervous energy. When morning came, they dressed carefully. Adrian in his formal Duke attire, Lydia in her best gown. They looked like what they were supposed to be. Nobility. Power. Control. Even if they were faking it. Ashford arrived at exactly noon, in a carriage far more expensive than anything the Blackthorns owned. He stepped down looking smug and assured, a man who'd already won and was just here to collect his prize. Adrian and Lydia met him in the drawing room. Your Graces. Ashford's smile didn't reach his eyes. Thank you for seeing me. Let's skip the pleasantries, Adrian said. What do you want? Direct. I appreciate that. Ashford settled into a chair without being invited. I want what I've always wanted. A stake in this estate. 40% should do it, and management authority over all financial decisions. Absolutely not. Then I go to the consortium with evidence that you misrepresented the estate's condition to secure funding. They'll void the contract. You'll lose everything. What evidence? Lydia asked. We provided them accurate numbers. Did you? Or did you conveniently forget to mention certain debts? Certain obligations that weren't in the official accounting? Ashford pulled out papers from his coat. I have documentation suggesting otherwise. Forged documentation, Adrian said flatly. Can you prove that? Can you prove beyond doubt that every number you gave the consortium was accurate? That you didn't embellish your cost-saving projections? That you didn't overstate the estate's potential revenue? Ashford leaned forward. Because I can create enough doubt that the consortium will have to investigate. And investigations take time. Time you don't have. The silence stretched. Then Lydia laughed. Both men looked at her like she'd lost her mind. I'm sorry, she said, still smiling. It's just, you spent so much time planning this, creating false evidence, threatening us, and you have no idea what we've been doing. Lydia, Adrian started. No. He needs to hear this. She stood, moving to the window. Lord Ashford, you're absolutely right. We could spend months in investigations, fighting over documentation, arguing about numbers. Or, and this is my personal favorite option, we could show the consortium our actual results. Results? In the 3 days since we secured funding, we've implemented every improvement we promised. Cottage repairs? Done. Staff restructuring? Complete. Supplier contract renegotiations? Finished. And we've documented every single change, every cost saving, every improvement. She turned to face him. So please, by all means, go to the consortium. Tell them we misrepresented our plans, and then watch them compare those plans to what we've actually accomplished in 72 hours. Ashford's smile faltered. You're bluffing. Am I? Would you like a tour? I'm sure the tenants would be happy to show you their new windows. Or perhaps you'd like to review the new supplier contracts. I have copies right here. Or maybe you'd like to speak with the neighboring estates who've already approached us about partnership deals based on our new model. That's impossible. You couldn't have done all that in 3 days. We had motivation. Lydia sat on the edge of Adrian's desk, casual and unbothered. See, you made a miscalculation. You assumed we'd panic, that we'd cave to your threats because we were desperate. But desperation makes people creative. It makes them work harder. It makes them refuse to give up even when giving up would be easier. Adrian stood, moving beside her. You also assumed we were alone, that we didn't have support. But in the past 3 days, 6 estates have reached out about business partnerships. The tenants have been spreading word about the improvements. The local magistrate stopped by this morning to commend our community investment. He smiled, cold and satisfied. You wanted to destroy our reputation. Instead, you gave us a deadline that forced us to prove ourselves. Ashford's face had gone from smug to uncertain to outright angry. You think this is over? You can still nothing. Lydia's voice was steel. Go ahead. Go to the consortium. Show them your forged documents. Watch them investigate and find that not only were we honest, we've exceeded every projection we made. Then watch your own reputation crumble when they realize you tried to sabotage a legitimate investment out of spite. Or, Adrian added, you can leave, now, and never threaten my family or my estate again. The silence that followed was heavy with rage and defeat. Finally, Ashford stood. This isn't finished. Yes, Lydia said quietly. It is. He left without another word, his expensive carriage rattling down the drive in a cloud of dust and broken pride. When he was gone, Adrian pulled Lydia into his arms and held her like she'd just won a war. You were terrifying, reckless, magnificent. He kissed her. Absolutely magnificent. We still need to send documentation to the consortium, prove we're not bluffing. Already done. I sent a full report this morning with courier. They should have it by this evening. Lydia pulled back to look at him. You sent it before Ashford even arrived? You inspired me. The best defense is overwhelming evidence of success. He grinned. Turns out you're a genius. Turns out we're good at this. The partnership thing. Better than good. They stood in the drawing room, holding each other, and for the first time since their wedding, the future felt like something to look forward to instead of something to survive. The response from the consortium came 2 days later. Mr. Thornton's letter was brief and to the point. Your Graces, we have reviewed your progress report with great interest. The speed and efficiency with which you have implemented your proposed improvements exceeds our expectations significantly. We have also been contacted by Lord Ashford with concerns about your initial representations. Lydia's heart stopped. Adrian's hand found hers. After thorough investigation, we have concluded that Lord Ashford's concerns are without merit and appear to be motivated by personal rather than professional considerations. His accusations reflect poorly on his own character, not yours. We consider our investment secure and look forward to a long and profitable partnership. Please continue the excellent work. Regards, H. Thornton. Lydia read it 3 times before she trusted it was real. We won, she said. Adrian, we actually won. We did. He was smiling, a real unguarded smile that transformed his entire face. We survived. Together. No, she kissed him. We didn't just survive, we won. There's a difference. That evening, they held another gathering in the main hall. This time, the mood was celebration instead of anxiety. Adrian stood with Lydia, addressing the assembled crowd. 3 months ago, I stood here and told you I'd been fighting this battle alone, that I'd been wrong to do so. Today, I want to thank all of you for proving that right. The work you've done, the improvements we've made together, this is what saves estates. Not legacy, not pride. People working together towards something better. Mrs. Henderson stood, her daughter beside her, fully recovered. Your Graces, we owe you. You owe us nothing, Lydia interrupted. We owe you. You trusted us when you had no reason to. You worked impossible hours to help us prove ourselves. This estate survives because of all of us. The applause was thunderous. Later, in their shared rooms, Adrian and Lydia lay together and talked about the future in concrete terms for the first time. I want to expand the tenant improvement program, Lydia said. Not just repairs, but upgrades, better heating, modern conveniences. That'll be expensive. It'll pay for itself in productivity and loyalty. Happy tenants work harder. Can't argue with that. Adrian traced circles on her shoulder. I want to modernize the farming operations, new equipment, crop rotation. The consortium's investment gives us capital to do it right. We should also invest in education, maybe a school for the tenant children, give them opportunities beyond just working the land. You want to build a school? I want to build a future, one where this estate doesn't just survive, but thrives. She looked at him. Is that crazy? Probably, but I love it anyway. He kissed her forehead. I love you. Say it again. I love you. Again? I love you. I love you. I'll say it every day for the rest of our lives if you want. I do want, very much. They fell asleep planning, not just for tomorrow, but for years ahead. for the estate they were building, for the family they might someday have, for the life they were creating together. The next morning brought another visitor. Catherine Pemberton arrived alone, without the hostile energy that had defined her previous visits. Mrs. Thorne showed her to the conservatory where Lydia was working. Catherine. Lydia set down her tools, uncertain. I heard what happened with Ashford. Catherine looked around the conservatory, taking in all the changes Lydia had made. My father told me about the business partnership you offered, about what you said. I meant it. You helped us when you didn't have to. That matters. I also hurt you, multiple times, said terrible things. You did. Lydia wasn't going to pretend otherwise. But you also made the choice to help when it counted. That matters more. Catherine was quiet for a moment. I'm leaving, going to London. My aunt has connections there, and I think I need distance from here, from all of this. That's probably wise. I wanted to say goodbye and to tell you, Catherine's voice cracked slightly. You're good for him, for Adrian. I spent years thinking I was what he needed, but I was wrong. You push him, challenge him, make him better. That's what he needed all along. Lydia didn't know what to say to that. Be happy, Catherine said. Both of you. Build something beautiful, and maybe someday I'll be able to be happy for you without it hurting. She left before Lydia could respond, walking back to her carriage with her head high and her shoulders straight. Lydia watched her go and felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. Catherine would be okay. Eventually. They all would. Adrian found her a few minutes later. Was that Catherine? Saying goodbye. She's leaving for London. Good for her. He wrapped his arms around Lydia from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. Speaking of London, the consortium wants to meet next month, review our progress, discuss expansion plans. Are you nervous? Terrified, but less so because you'll be there. Obviously, we're a team now. The best team. They stood together in the conservatory, surrounded by growing things and sunlight, and Lydia thought about how far they'd come. From a marriage that felt like a death sentence to this, partnership, love, possibility. Adrian? Thank you for trying, for letting me in, for choosing us. He turned her to face him, cupping her face in his hands. Thank you for not giving up on me, for fighting when I wanted to surrender, for showing me what we could be if I was brave enough to try. He kissed her, slow and deep. I would have lost everything without you. The estate, yes, but more importantly, I would have lost myself. You saved me, Lydia, in every way a person can be saved. We saved each other. Then we're even. Never. I'm definitely winning. He laughed, and the sound of it, free and genuine, was worth everything they'd been through to get here. Outside, the estate was transforming. Cottages were being rebuilt. Fields were being replanted with new methods. The future was taking shape, one careful decision at a time. And inside Blackthorn Manor, in a conservatory full of roses that refused to die, two people who'd started as strangers were building something that might actually last. Not because it was easy, not because it was what they'd planned, but because they'd chosen it, fought for it, refused to let it go. And that, Lydia thought, made all the difference. 6 months after they'd signed the consortium agreement, Lydia woke to find Adrian already awake, staring at the ceiling with an expression she couldn't quite read. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. He turned to look at her, and she saw something close to wonder in his eyes. That's the problem. I keep waiting for disaster, for something to go catastrophically wrong, and it just doesn't. You're complaining about things going well? I'm suspicious of it. He pulled her closer. I've spent 12 years bracing for the next crisis. I don't know how to just exist without waiting for the floor to drop out. Then I guess you'll have to learn. She kissed his shoulder. Same way you learned everything else. Badly at first, then slightly less badly, until eventually you're almost competent. Your confidence in me is inspiring. I try. They lay there in comfortable silence until Mrs. Thorne knocked to announce that breakfast was ready, and they had visitors arriving within the hour, representatives from 3 neighboring estates interested in discussing the agricultural partnership model. The meeting went well, better than well. By the time the representatives left, they had preliminary agreements for cooperative purchasing, shared equipment, and knowledge exchange. The kind of collaboration that would strengthen all their estates instead of forcing them to compete. "This is working," Adrian said after they'd gone, sounding almost surprised. "The model we built. It's actually working." "Did you doubt it would?" "Constantly. I still do." He shuffled papers on his desk. Organizing them with the precise movements Lydia had learned meant he was thinking hard about something. "Lydia, I need to tell you something about the Heir situation." Her stomach tightened. They'd been so focused on saving the estate that they'd barely discussed the original purpose of their marriage. "What about it?" "I don't care anymore. If we have children, wonderful. If we don't, that's fine too." He looked at her directly. "I married you because I needed an heir. I fell in love with you because of who you are. And I want you to know that the second thing matters infinitely more than the first." "Adrian, I mean it. If having children is something you want, then I want it too. But not because of legacy or duty or any of that. Just because I love you and I think you'd be an extraordinary mother." He took her hands. "But if you don't want that, if you want to focus on the estate or travel or build your conservatory into something magnificent, then that's what we'll do. Together. No pressure. No expectations beyond being partners in whatever we choose." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. "I do want children. Eventually. But not because I'm supposed to produce an heir. Because I want to build a family with you." "Eventually works for me." "Good. Because I'm not ready to share you yet." He kissed her, and the relief in it was palpable. Like he'd been carrying this conversation around for weeks, dreading her reaction. "You're ridiculous," she said against his mouth. "You married me anyway." "Worst decision of my life." "Liar." They were interrupted by another knock. Mrs. Thorne looking unusually flustered. "Your Graces, I apologize, but there's a situation with the Henderson cottage. The eldest boy, he's been accepted to the grammar school in the village, but they're saying he can't attend because of tuition costs." Lydia was already moving toward the door. "What's the amount?" £12 for the year, Your Grace. The Hendersons don't have it." "Then we'll pay it. Add it to the estate education fund." Mrs. Thorne blinked. "The what?" "The education fund. We're establishing one. Any tenant child who gets accepted to school and can't afford tuition, the estate covers it." Lydia looked at Adrian. "Right?" He smiled. "Apparently, though I wish you'd discuss these things before announcing them." "Where's the fun in that?" "Fine. Education fund it is. Mrs. Thorne, make a note. We'll need to budget for it properly." After Mrs. Thorne left, Adrian pulled Lydia back into his arms. "You know what you're doing, right? You're changing everything. The way this estate runs. The way people think about their place here. Everything my father built. Your father built a monument to his own ego that nearly destroyed everything. I'm building something sustainable." She met his eyes. "If that bothers you, well, it doesn't. It terrifies me sometimes because change is terrifying, but it doesn't bother me." He kissed her forehead. "You're rebuilding my family's legacy into something actually worth having. I'd be an idiot to object." "You're occasionally an idiot anyway." "True, but I'm your idiot." The months continued to pass, and with them came more changes. The school fund became official, funded by a portion of the agricultural profits. 2 more tenant children enrolled within the month. The cottage improvements expanded to include modern plumbing in the newest repairs. The cooperative purchasing agreements with neighboring estates saved everyone money and built relationships that had been fractured by years of competition. Blackthorn Manor stopped being an isolated fortress and became part of a community. And Adrian stopped being the cold, unreachable Duke and became something more human. Lydia saw it in small moments, the way he'd stop to talk with tenants instead of just acknowledging them with a nod, the way he'd spend an entire afternoon helping repair a barn roof because they were short-handed, the way he'd started smiling more, real smiles, not the polite masks he used to wear. "You're different," she told him one evening as they walked through the gardens together, "from who you were when we married. Better different or worse different?" "Better, definitely better, though you're still brooding and dramatic." Some things never change. They stopped at the rose garden, fully restored now, thriving under Lydia's care. She'd added new varieties, creating a riot of colors that would have scandalized Adrian's father, but made her heart sing. "I never thanked you properly," Adrian said quietly. "For what?" "For refusing to give up on me. On us. You could have left a dozen times. Should have left, probably. But you stayed and you fought, and you turned this disaster into something beautiful." He gestured at the gardens, the manor, everything. "All of this. It exists because you wouldn't let me surrender. We built it together. You started it. I just finally got smart enough to help." Oh, Lydia leaned into him, breathing in the scent of roses and evening air and possibility. "I love you, even when you're being self-deprecating and ridiculous. I love you too, especially when you're being bossy and rearranging centuries of tradition without asking permission. Someone had to. Thank God it was you." The consortium meeting in London came in early autumn. Adrian and Lydia traveled together, staying in a modest hotel instead of the townhouse they'd sold. The night before the meeting, Adrian was a wreck. "They're going to want detailed reports, projections, evidence that we're not just lucky but sustainable." "Then it's good we brought detailed reports, projections, and evidence." Lydia handed him a glass of wine. "Drink this. Breathe. We've done the work. Now we just have to show it. What if it's not enough? It will be. And if it's not, we'll adapt. Same way we've adapted to everything else." The meeting was held in a grand conference room that made Lydia feel simultaneously intimidated and determined. Mr. Thornton and his associates sat on one side of a massive table. Adrian and Lydia sat on the other. "Your Graces," Thornton began, "thank you for coming. We wanted to review your progress and discuss the future of our partnership." Adrian started to speak, but Lydia put her hand on his arm and stood instead. "Before we begin, I want to address something directly. When we took your investment, we made promises, aggressive promises about what we could accomplish. And I know there were questions about whether we could deliver." She opened her portfolio. "So let me show you what we've actually done." She walked them through everything. The cottage improvements, complete with testimonials from tenants. The cost savings, documented down to the penny. The cooperative partnerships with neighboring estates, including letters from other landowners praising the model. The education fund, with enrollment numbers and projections for long-term community impact. In 6 months, we've exceeded every goal we set. Agricultural yield is up 18%. Operating costs are down 23%. Tenant satisfaction, which we're now measuring formally, has increased significantly. And we've built relationships with 5 neighboring estates that are interested in replicating our model. She laid out page after page of evidence, watching the consortium members' expressions shift from skeptical to impressed to genuinely excited. When she finished, Thornton was smiling. "Duchess Blackthorne, I must say, when we invested, we expected competent management. What you've delivered is revolutionary." He looked at his associates. "Gentlemen, I think we need to discuss expanding our partnership." "Expanding?" Adrian found his voice. "Your model works, not just for Blackthorne Manor, but potentially for estates across the region. We'd like to fund a larger initiative, helping other struggling estates implement similar reforms. With your guidance, of course." Lydia felt Adrian's hand find hers under the table. "You want us to help other estates?" she asked. "We want you to transform the way estates operate, share your methods, build a network of sustainable cooperative properties instead of isolated, competing ones." Thornton leaned forward. "It's ambitious. It would require travel, consultation, significant time investment, but the potential impact is extraordinary. Are you interested?" Lydia looked at Adrian. His eyes were wide with shock and something that might have been hope. "Can we have a moment?" he asked. They stepped outside into the corridor. "This is insane," Adrian said. "They want us to what? Become consultants? Travel around telling other aristocrats how to run their estates?" "Apparently." I don't, He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "Lydia, 6 months ago I was about to lose everything. Now they want to use our estate as a model for reform across the region. How did this happen?" "We worked hard. We took risks. We refused to give up. She took his hands, and now we have a choice. We can say yes and try to help others the way we helped ourselves, or we can say no and focus on just Blackthorn Manor. Either way is fine. But you need to decide what you want. What do you want? I want to help. I want other people to have what we built. The possibility of change, of sustainability, of not being crushed by legacy and debt and expectations. She squeezed his hands, but only if you want it too. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled, that real, unguarded smile that still made her heart skip. Let's do it. Let's change everything. They went back in and told Thornton yes. The next year was a blur of activity. They traveled to struggling estates, met with desperate landowners, shared their methods, and adjusted them for different circumstances. Some people embraced the changes. Others resisted, too attached to tradition or too proud to admit they needed help. But enough people listened. Enough estates started implementing reforms, and slowly, the network Thornton had envisioned began to take shape. Lydia discovered she was good at this, at teaching, at problem-solving, at convincing stubborn aristocrats that change wasn't weakness but survival. Adrian discovered he was good at the technical side, the numbers, the contracts, the systematic planning that turned ideas into reality. Together, they were formidable. And through it all, Blackthorn Manor thrived. The tenants' children attended school. The cottages had modern amenities. The fields produced record harvests. The rose garden became famous enough that people traveled just to see it. The estate that had been dying became a showcase for what was possible when people chose progress over pride. 2 years after their wedding, Lydia stood in the conservatory, expanded now, twice its original size, and realized she was happy. Not the desperate, clinging happiness of survival, but the deep, settled happiness of building something meaningful. Adrian found her there, as he so often did. Mrs. Henderson's daughter just got accepted to the teachers' college in the city. That's wonderful. She wants to come back after she graduates. Teach at the village school. He wrapped his arms around Lydia from behind. Because of the education fund you insisted on. Because you gave her a chance. We gave her a chance. You started it. I just signed the checks. He kissed her neck. You've changed so many lives, Lydia. Do you realize that? We've changed them, together. Still giving me too much credit. She turned in his arms. Still not giving yourself enough. They stood there among the roses and the green growing things, and Lydia thought about how far they'd come. From strangers bound by duty to partners bound by choice. From a dying estate to a thriving community. From isolation to connection. I'm pregnant, she said. Adrian froze. What? I'm pregnant. About 2 months, I think. I wanted to be sure before I told you. His face went through a dozen emotions in seconds. Shock, joy, terror, wonder. He couldn't seem to finish a sentence. We're having a baby, yes. Are you happy about it? Terrified, excited, both. She put her hand on her stomach, still flat but holding possibility. Are you? Terrified, excited, both, he echoed. Then he pulled her close, holding her like she was something precious and fragile. I'm going to be a terrible father. Probably. I'll be a terrible mother. Our poor child. They'll survive. We'll figure it out together. Together, he agreed, like everything else. The pregnancy was difficult. Lydia was sick for months, exhausted and miserable and occasionally doubting every decision that had led to this point. Adrian hovered anxiously, drove her crazy with his concern, and generally made himself useful in the most annoying way possible. I'm fine, she snapped for the 100th time as he tried to adjust her pillows. Stop fussing. You're growing a human. I'm allowed to fuss. You're driving me insane. Also allowed. Despite the discomfort, they kept working. Lydia from home mostly, consulting on estate reforms via correspondence. Adrian traveling when necessary, always rushing back like he was afraid she'd have the baby the moment he left. You know babies take 9 months, right? She asked after he cut short a trip to be home 3 days early. I know. But what if this baby is an overachiever? It's your child. Of course it's an overachiever. The baby, a girl, arrived in early spring, screaming her displeasure at the world. She had Adrian's dark hair and Lydia's stubborn chin and an expression that suggested she was already deeply unimpressed with everything. "She's perfect," Adrian said, holding her with the careful terror of someone who'd never held a baby before. "She's wrinkled and angry," Lydia said from the bed, exhausted and exhilarated, perfectly wrinkled and angry. They named her Margaret, after Adrian's mother, Maggie, for short. And she changed everything all over again. Adrian, who'd spent his whole life afraid to feel, fell completely apart the first time Maggie smiled at him. Lydia watched him rock their daughter to sleep at 3 a.m, singing off-key lullabies, and fell in love with him all over again. "You're good at this," she told him one night, watching him pace with a fussy Maggie. "I have no idea what I'm doing." "None of us do. That's parenthood." Comforting. But he was good at it, patient in ways Lydia had never expected, gentle, present. Everything his own father apparently hadn't been. "I'm not going to be like him," Adrian said one night, after Maggie was finally asleep. "I'm not going to make her feel like she has to be perfect, like love is conditional on duty." "I know. I'm going to tell her I love her every day. I'm going to be present. I'm going to—" "Adrian?" Lydia stopped him. "You're already doing all of that. You're already the father you want to be." "How do you know?" "Because I see you with her. Because you're trying. Because you care enough to be terrified of getting it wrong." She pulled him close. "That's all any of us can do." The years passed. Maggie grew, stubborn, brilliant, utterly fearless. She ran through the manor like she owned it, charmed the tenants, terrorized the staff, and generally made life chaotic and wonderful. 2 more children followed, a boy named Thomas who was quiet and thoughtful, and another girl named Eleanor who was pure mischief from birth. The estate continued to thrive. The reform network expanded to include over 30 properties. The education fund sent dozens of children to school. The cooperative partnerships created stability across the region. And Blackthorn Manor, which had once been a cold, dying place, became known for its warmth. For the Duchess who grew roses and revolutionized estate management. For the Duke who'd learned to be human. For the children who grew up knowing they were loved unconditionally. On their 10th anniversary, Adrian and Lydia stood in the rose garden, expanded yet again, now sprawling across several acres, and looked back at everything they'd built. "Do you remember our wedding?" Adrian asked. "Unfortunately, you were awful." "I was terrified." "You were awful and terrified." She leaned against him. "I thought my life was over, that I'd married into a beautiful prison. And now? Now I know my life actually started that day. Everything before was just preparation for this." Adrian turned her to face him. "I don't deserve you. I've never deserved you. But I thank whatever twist of fate brought you into my life every single day. You're being dramatic again. I'm being honest. Same thing with you." He kissed her, slow and deep, with the confidence of a man who knew he was loved completely. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear their children playing, Maggie bossing her siblings around, Thomas trying to negotiate peace, Eleanor ignoring both of them and doing whatever she wanted. "They're going to be a handful when they're older," Lydia said. "They're a handful now, but they're ours. And they're growing up in a house full of love instead of obligation. That's worth everything we went through to get here. Everything and more." They stood there in the garden Lydia had built from ruins, in the estate they'd saved together, surrounded by the life they'd created. And for the first time in either of their lives, the future wasn't something to fear or endure. It was something to look forward to. That evening, they gathered for dinner, all 5 of them, plus Mrs. Thorne, who'd become more family than staff over the years. The children argued about nothing important. Adrian mediated with exaggerated seriousness. Lydia watched them all and felt her heart so full it almost hurt. After dinner, after the children were in bed, after the house had settled into quiet, Lydia and Adrian returned to their rooms, the ones they'd shared for 10 years now. "I was thinking," Adrian said, pulling her close, "about legacy." "Oh no, you're philosophizing. This is never good." "Hush, I'm being profound." He kissed her hair. "My father thought legacy was about preserving the past, maintaining what came before, proving his worth through what he could hold on to." "And you disagree?" "Completely. Legacy isn't about preservation. It's about transformation. It's about taking what you're given, even if what you're given is broken, and turning it into something better, something worth passing on. That's actually fairly profound. I'm impressed. I have my moments. He pulled back to look at her. We did that. We took a dying estate and a doomed marriage, and we transformed them. We built something our children will inherit that's actually worth having, not because of money or title or land, but because of what it represents. And what does it represent? Hope, change, the possibility that no matter how bad things seem, you can always choose to fight for something better. He cupped her face in his hands. You taught me that. You are my legacy, Lydia. Everything good in my life started the day you refused to let me surrender. She kissed him, pouring a decade of love and partnership and stubborn determination into it. We're each other's legacy, she said when they finally broke apart. Every choice we made, every battle we fought, every moment we chose each other over everything else. That's what we pass on. Not the estate, or the money, or the title. The knowledge that love is worth fighting for. That partnership is stronger than pride. That changing everything is better than preserving nothing. Have I mentioned lately that you're extraordinary? Not in the last hour. I was starting to worry. He laughed, and the sound of it, free and genuine and full of joy, was still her favorite sound in the world. They stood at their window, looking out over the estate they'd saved and the gardens they'd built and the home they'd created. The moon was rising, painting everything silver. Do you think they know? Lydia asked. The children. Do they know how close we came to losing all of this? Someday we'll tell them. When they're old enough to understand, we'll tell them about the debts and the desperation and the choice we made to fight instead of surrender. Adrian pulled her back against his chest. We'll tell them that nothing worth having comes easy, that the best things in life require courage and work and the willingness to fail spectacularly while trying. And if they ask why we fought so hard, we'll tell them the truth, that we fought for them, for the possibility of them, for the chance to build something they could inherit that was actually worth keeping. Lydia turned in his arms, looking up at the man she'd married 10 years ago, the cold, closed-off Duke who'd seemed unreachable, who'd become her partner, her love, her home. I would do it all again, she said, every difficult moment, every fight, every crisis. I'd do it all again for this. So would I, without hesitation. Even the part where you were awful at our wedding? Especially that part, because it meant you had to teach me how to be better. Glad to be of service. They went to bed wrapped in each other's arms, talking quietly about plans for the estate, dreams for the children, all the small and large moments that made up a life shared. And when they finally fell asleep, it was with the peaceful certainty of people who'd fought for their happiness and won. The next morning brought new challenges. Thomas had a nightmare. Eleanor threw a tantrum about breakfast. Maggie announced she wanted to learn estate management and demanded to sit in on all meetings. Normal chaos. Adrian handled the nightmare with patient cuddles. Lydia negotiated the breakfast tantrum with practiced diplomacy. They both agreed to let Maggie shadow them, because why not? She'd learn eventually anyway. Might as well start now. She's 8, Adrian protested half-heartedly. She's smart and determined. Remind you of anyone? If you're suggesting she takes after you. She absolutely takes after me. Poor thing. By midday, they had a meeting with representatives from 2 more estates interested in reform. Maggie sat in the corner with a notebook, taking serious notes in her careful handwriting. When the representatives left, she marched up to Adrian with her notes. You missed an opportunity. I did? They wanted to discuss water management. You could have suggested cooperative irrigation systems like the ones we built with the Pemberton estate. Cost savings of approximately 17%, plus improved yield consistency. Adrian stared at his 8-year-old daughter. How do you know that? I read your reports. You leave them on your desk. She said this like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Also, you should renegotiate the contract with the grain merchant. We're overpaying by at least 4%. Lydia bit back a laugh at Adrian's expression. Anything else? He asked. The rose garden needs better drainage on the south end, and Thomas wants a puppy, but he's too scared to ask. Maggie closed her notebook. That's all for now. Let me know when the next meeting is. She marched out with the same serious determination she'd marched in with. "We've created a monster," Adrian said. "We've created a blackthorn." "Same thing." Lydia pulled him close. "She's going to be formidable." "She's already formidable. She's 8 and she's correcting my business decisions." "She's your daughter." "Of course she is." That night, with all 3 children finally asleep and the house quiet, Adrian found Lydia in the conservatory. She was repotting a new rose variety, her hands covered in dirt, completely content. "I love you," he said. She looked up, smiling. "I know. You told me this morning. I'm telling you again, I love you. I love our ridiculous children. I love this life we built. I love that you're still getting dirt under your fingernails, even though you could hire an army of gardeners. Where's the fun in that?" "Exactly." He sat beside her, not caring about the dirt. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been? If you'd given up? If I'd made the deal with Ashford? If we'd never learned to fight together?" "Sometimes, but not often. No point dwelling on paths we didn't take." "Fair. Sometimes I can't believe this is real, that we made it, that we're happy." "Believe it. We earned this. Every difficult, messy, imperfect moment of it." She leaned against him. "And we're going to keep earning it, every day, for the rest of our lives. Promise?" "Promise." They sat together in the conservatory as night fell, surrounded by growing things and the life they'd built from ruins. Outside, the estate was peaceful. The cottages were warm and well-maintained. The fields were fertile. The children were safe and loved. And inside Blackthorn Manor, in a conservatory that had once been a refuge from loneliness, 2 people who'd started as strangers held each other and watched the stars come out. They'd fought for this, bled for it, refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier, and in the end, they'd won something more valuable than any estate or title or legacy. They'd won each other. And that, Lydia thought as she fell asleep in Adrian's arms that night, was worth everything they'd sacrificed to get here. The manor stood against the night sky, no longer a prison or a tomb, but a home. A testament to what 2 people could build when they chose love over duty, partnership over pride, and change over preservation. And in the rose garden, the flowers bloomed, beautiful and imperfect, thriving despite the harsh soil and cold winds, refusing to die. Just like the marriage that had saved them all.